November 9, 2009, meeting of the Anchorage Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Would the secretary call the roll, please?
Rick Morrison. Nancy Pease.
Here.
Jim Frederick.
Here.
Connie Yoshimura.
Here.
Tony Jones.
Here.
Art Isham.
Here.
John Weddleton.
Here.
Bruce Phelps.
Mr. Phelps will be arriving around 7 o'clock, and Mr. Morrison is excused this evening.
Stacy Dean.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum. The next item on our agenda is the minutes of August 31 and October 12, 2009.
Madam Chair, move for approval of the minutes of Planning and Zoning Commission, August 31st and October 12th, 2009.
Okay, and if Mr. Frederick has seconded the motion. Any discussion? Mr. Weddleton?
Well, for each of these sets of minutes, I had a number of recommended corrections that the Secretary would like to discuss. So I'd like to amend the motion to postpone until our next meeting.
Okay. Would that be acceptable to Mr. Isham and Mr. Frederick?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Is there any objection by members of the Commission to postpone to our next meeting? Hearing none, those will come up on our next agenda. And since the resolution deals with the hillside, well, we'll deal with the consent agenda.
Madam Chair, we need to do disclosures first.
Right, disclosures. Go ahead.
Ms. Pease, do you have anything to disclose this evening?
I've previously, well, the Hillside District Plan is still on the agenda, so I'm a resident of the Hillside. I have no stake in that plan any greater than any other resident of the Hillside. And with regard to the Connect Arm Crossing, I have no personal stake or conflict of interest in that. I do have family members who are involved on both sides of the issue.
Thank you, Ms. Pease. Mr. Frederick? Nothing. Ms. Yoshimura?
Madam Chair, I am the owner of a large parcel of property at the end of Potter Valley Road, and so I have not been a party to the Hillside District Plan deliberations, and so would be abstaining from any actions tonight. I also would like to disclose that I own a home about 4 miles from Houston on the north shore of Big Lake, Alaska.
Okay, thank you. So you will be abstaining if the Hillside District comes to vote tonight?
That is correct.
Ms. Jones?
Yes, I have a disclosure on the public hearing item for the long-range transportation plan with regard to the Connect Arm Crossing. On October 7th, I attended a meeting in the governor's office where other people were present. There was a staff person for the meeting was attended. I'll try to remember all the people that were there. There was a staff person for the governor, and I think his first name was Randy. He was a staff person to deal with transportation. The governor was only present for a few minutes near the end. And there was the other people that were present was Suzanne DiPietro, Lois Epstein, myself, and then there were 2 people from the Government Hill community, a man and a woman, and I don't remember either of their names. I had checked with the staff to make sure there wasn't a conflict of interest before I attended the meeting. The purpose of my participation in the meeting was to explain the Planning and Zoning Commission's role as the Citizen Advisory Committee to AMATS, the end. I didn't discuss, and I made it very clear to them that, and I did provide them with prior resolutions, but I made it very clear that those resolutions had no bearing on any future action, or the sentiment in those resolutions had no bearing on any future action the Commission may take, that every time a matter comes for us, we look at it independently, and mainly just explained what the role was of the Planning Commission as a citizen advisory committee of AMATS. As I recall, Ms. Epstein discussed financial things, and I think she had a few pages of information about financial information that she shared with them. Ms. DiPietro spoke about the AMATS process, and there were no discussions about whether this was a good project or a bad project during this conversation. And the people from the community really didn't get a chance to speak because the governor could only spend a few minutes and he needed to go into another meeting. There were some questions asked of them, I think, by the staff person about maybe some of the environmental work that had been done and historic preservation projects or in that part of the research. And that's about all I remember. There was an agenda that had basically those 4 topics on it and the people that were going to talk about it. Now, I requested that information, that Ms. Epstein submit all of any information that was turned into the governor's office to the staff so it could be included in our packet. Well, I didn't see it in our packet, and so I was surprised. Well, it turns out she emailed it to me last week, and I don't know what happened to it. I was in the hospital last Wednesday and Thursday, and possibly in my haze, I deleted it. I just now checked my BlackBerry, and it's not there, so when I get to my office, I will check my garbage can on my computer, and anyone that's interested in that, you absolutely have a right to it, and it should have been, and it will be part of our record. I will make certain of that. So I'm just making that full and complete disclosure. That's a long one, but it's the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Ms. Young.
You're welcome.
Ms. Dean.
I own property at Point McKenzie. I own 3 pieces of property. They're all in my husband's name, Cody Lee, if you were to look it up in property taxes. I have, as recently as this last summer, considered developing that property. And I have several friends I've looked at developing that property together with. Whether I have any, it's in my best interest for the bridge to go in order for me to develop that property. I'll be honest and say that right up front. Whether I should vote on this or not on AMATS, I don't know. Can I be impartial? I'd like to believe I could, but I'll leave it in your hands.
Ms. Dean, you stated that you feel as though you would have difficulty being impartial?
Probably, yeah, because I do have enough money at stake.
Okay. Well, what we need to do then is we need to have a motion directing her to participate, and then we can make our own decision as to whether she should or shouldn't participate based on her statement. So I'm looking for a motion. Mr. Weddleton, Ms. Yoshimura seconded it, and I assume the motion says that we're directing her to participate.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see, Mr. Weddleton, since you made the motion, do you wish to speak to it?
I'll vote against it. I think the statement that she has a clear, substantial financial interest is kind of the bottom line on these things.
Any further comments?
No.
Okay, since there is objection, we'll have to use our machines. A yes vote directs her to participate, a no vote
Sends her home.
Sends her home for this particular one.
Good night, Miss Dean.
So shall I leave now?
Yes, you may. You are excused.
Well, not for the whole evening.
Yep.
She's going to have to sit just on this particular thing.
Right, but but after that case, actually, we do have that resolution we need to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah, so after we deal with the resolution, you can go home.
Okay, Mr. Weddleton.
I have no conflicts, but a couple of disclosures. One is that prior to being a member of the commission, I was president of the Anchorage Citizens Coalition that's commented many times over numerous years on this issue, the Connecticut Arm Crossing issue. It's also a member of the Chamber of Commerce's Business and Economic Development Committee, which also came forward with a comment on it. And then last month I caught the tail end of a presentation by a Cavada representative at the Huffman O'Malley Community Council. The information I got there parallels pieces of the information in our packet. There's nothing new.
Thank you. And I have nothing to disclose. Ms. Jones?
Okay. All right. The next item on our agenda then is our consent agenda.
Madam Chair, move for the approval of the consent agenda item D1A, Hillside District Plan approval.
And that's been seconded by Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Weddleton, you're in the queue to speak.
I'd like to amend it to postpone a decision on this.
Okay.
Should I discuss that now or wait for
Excuse me? You can just sit there and abstain. Okay, so you're just, you can just, if our maker of the motion concurs and there's no objection, we can just...
Well, all I want to do is hear some reasons as to why we want to
Okay.
postpone it. That's all I want to hear.
I sent in several pages of comments on the resolution with some recommended changes, and I sent those in late this afternoon, and I understand Commissioner Pease did the same. So I don't think staff has had time to look at those thoroughly and recommend how to handle those things.
Yeah, I accept the postponement.
Okay. And how long do you think, staff, how long do you think you're going to need to respond to that?
I was sort of hoping that we didn't even postpone it. I have to agree that I haven't thoroughly looked at them, but I spent the whole afternoon looking at them. If you do postpone it at the very next meeting, because it won't take me long to incorporate the changes into the resolution or to address the ones. There are some issues that perhaps, since you have Mr. Wilbur here on the trails, you might want to ask him some questions on that, unless you want to just postpone the whole thing and discuss it all at once. Because there are some that we would probably disagree with.
Okay. Ms. Pease?
Yes, I just wanted to find out from Ms. Contreras whether she'd had a chance to look at them and whether she thought there were many that would require much discussion. I think probably about half of what I sent in were on the nature of typos or which page does this go on. But there were some that were substantive and would require somebody to look at the minutes and verify that I was on course or not. So I guess we heard from Ms. Contreras that
I think that I could try to get, I don't know what the next meeting is, but I could probably have it ready for the next meeting.
that would be most efficient for everybody then, I guess.
Okay. And according to my calendar, our next meeting will be on, not January, on December 7th. Does that sound correct, Mr. Weaver?
That's correct, Madam Chairman. We're basically trying to wrap up the resolution, wrap up the changes to the plan, and get it introduced to the Assembly in December, but it'll push it up basically a month and a half by waiting to take a look at these minutes. It's probably appropriate to do that. I suggest Ms. Pease and Mr. Weddleton get with Joanne and kind of reconcile those comments, and then we'll bring it back to you in December.
Okay. Thank you. So is there any objection to, by the other commissioners to postponing this to the first meeting in December? I didn't hear any, so it'll be postponed to then. Our unfinished business, the Title 21 rewrite, Chapter 14 definitions, has been postponed to December 14th. And now we have arrived at public hearings, item G on our agenda.
At December 7th?
Yes, December 7th. And it's case number 2009-148. The petitioner is the municipality of Anchorage, requesting an amendment to the long-range transportation plan with regard to the Anchorage long-range transportation plan to delay the Knik Arm crossing. Could we have the staff presentation, please?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. My name is Vivian Underwood. I'm a transportation planner with the Municipality of Anchorage Traffic Department. For this public hearing, the commissioners have in their packet a memo, an issue response summary, a copy of the amendment, financial plans, and the commissioners have copies of the comments. And the commissioners also have a copy of information that was provided just today that is not in your packets. One is information from Lois Epstein on Knik Arm Bridge financials, and then another is a letter from the City of Houston, Mayor Roger Purcell. For those of you who may not be aware, the long-range transportation plan is an element of the comprehensive plan for the municipality of Anchorage, and it also serves as the required tool for helping the municipality of Anchorage appropriate federal funds. So we're required to do it for federal reasons as well as for municipal reasons. And it is ultimately approved by the AMATS Policy Committee. Before I begin the presentation, I just wanted to review some history with you. The bridge has been in the long-range transportation plan for many years. It was originally put in as a study area, but in 2007, Cabada asked AMATS to put it in their long-range transportation plan because they needed it to be in the long-range transportation plan to get a record of decision from the Federal Highway Administration. And what that allows them to do is proceed to the next phase of the project. So in 2007, the AMATS Policy Committee did put it in, but with conditions. In response to many concerns expressed by the municipality of Anchorage, it was understood from the municipality, from the assembly discussion, that any single condition not being met would be reason to remove the Knik Arm project from the LRTP. One of the conditions was that the final environmental impact statement would be issued and that concerns of the municipality, the Mat-Su Valley, the railroad, Alaska Railroad, and the public be addressed. Another condition was that the financing details of the Knik Arm crossing be solidified. And there were other conditions as well. So the bridge was put in 2007. In 2008, in response to an assembly resolution requesting the policy committee to delete the project from the long-range transportation plan, the AMATS Policy Committee in April released an LRTP amendment to delete the KAC from the LRTP for public review. Up to this time, they had not had the benefit of a recommendation from the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee. On May 18th, there was an AMATS public meeting, open house style, with representatives from Kabata, the railroad, the municipal planning and traffic departments, and the planning and zoning public hearing was held right afterwards, and it was continued to June the 1st. I said Matsu. There was a representative from the Matsu Borough who attended, Patrick Duffy, but he was not part of the presentation. Then on the 15th of June, the Planning and Zoning Commission passed a resolution recommending that the Assembly and the Policy Committee delete the Knickerham Crossing from the LRTP. On the 17th of June, the Freight Advisory Committee recommended retaining the KAC in the LRTP. On June 18th, the Technical Advisory Committee chose to take action, and they recommended to the Policy Committee and the Assembly a different version of the amendment. They recommended that the project be retained in the LRTP, but moving it to the long term from the short term. And this was based on changes in technical information that they've had since 2007. One is that changes in financial market challenged the viability of the public-private partnership originally envisioned, and that this would pose new risks associated with the funding of the project in the near future. Another reason was the technical challenges in the viability of permitting the proposed project due to the recent listing of the beluga whales as an endangered species. Another reason was the slowing in the trend and the rapid growth in the Matsu, and new interest expressed publicly by Kabata to change the project to accommodate heavy rail. On June 24th, the Assembly voted unanimously in support of the revised proposed amendment to keep the Knickerham Crossing in the LRTP, but moving it from the long term, from the short term to the long term. On June 24th, the cities of Houston and Wasilla were joined by Kabata, and they filed suit against AMAT's Policy Committee members by asking for a restraining order for 10 days on the Policy Committee action, saying that they had not had enough time to comment on the revised amendment. The court denied the request for this restraining order, and the hearing was postponed to August 18th. On the 25th of June, the Policy Committee approved a revised LRTP amendment to retain the Knickerham Crossing in the LRTP, but moving it from the short term to the long term. The revised amendment was not released for further public comment prior to approval. That was part of the whole problem. So on the 27th, there was an out-of-court settlement, and the Policy Committee rescinded their earlier approval. They remanded the amendment back to the Technical Advisory Committee, and they asked that it be returned back to them, removing the rail and pedestrian elements. In September, the Technical Advisory Committee recommended that the Policy Committee vote to release the revised LRTP to reflect these changes and consider adding the pedestrian facilities for consistency with Phase 2 of the Knickerham Crossing project, and consider a resolution to Kabata in support of Kabata's desire to build a rail-ready bridge, recognizing the importance of a multimodal bridge structure in the long term. So on September 24th, the Policy Committee released the revised LRTP for a 30-day public review period. Pages 1 through 4 move the Knickerham Crossing Bridge from the short term to the long term. Pages 4 through 13 demonstrate conformance with new Safe Hulu planning regulations. And pages 8 through 10 have the revised financial plan. The references to pedestrian and rail are still deleted, however. So why long term? What are the benefits of doing this? For the municipality of Anchorage, from our perspective, it allows Kabata to continue with the preliminary engineering and environmental work that they already have money to do. They can continue to spend the $68 million they already have to do this work. It allows Kabata to reassess its financial plan in light of possible cost increases and changes in the economical climate for the public-private partnerships. It allows Kabata to continue work on obtaining concurrence from resource agencies on environmental permitting issues, notably the beluga whales, and it diminishes likelihood that repayment of the federal dollars spent to date will be an issue because it delays the record of decision while issues and uncertainties continue to be resolved. It allows AMETS to continue the conversation with Cabata as it moves forward to update the LRTP due in 2011, and it allows time for the comprehensive plan to mature with more redevelopment and infill downtown. It allows the highway-to-highway project to advance and the Regional Transportation Authority to advance so that we can achieve desired numbers through those projects. Here's what we heard in May. The question at the time was, should the Kinnickinnic Crossing be in or out of the LRTP? Okay, of 140 people who provided comments voting one way or the other, 63% of the 147 people said keep it in the plan, 37% said take it out. Well, where were these people from? Of the people who wanted it in, fewer than half were from Anchorage, and a very small percentage was actually from the Mat-Su Borough. Of the people who wanted it out, 73% of those people were from Anchorage, and 4% were from the Mat-Su Borough. From what we heard recently in the fall, just to give you the flavor of the public opinion we've heard, this is a little broader spectrum now. It's not just is it in the plan or is it out of the plan. It's do we keep it short-term, long-term, or do we put it out completely? So I tried to organize the comments. If you were going to an ice cream store like Coldstone, you might say, love it, gotta have it. Strong support, it's pretty evenly divided between people who strongly support the project for the short term and people who are really not crazy about the project and would like to see it in the long term or out of the LRTP completely. There were 130 people who specified whether it should be in the long term or the short term. Of the people who less than 0.5% of this group specified that they thought it should be in the short term. 55%, the majority of people thought it should either be in the long term or out of the LRTP entirely. Where were these people from? Well, this gives us a little different picture of who the people were who were commenting. Of the people who wanted it in the short term, 40% were from the Mat-Su Borough, 25% from the municipality. On the other end of the spectrum, of the people who wanted it out of the LRTP, 70% of the people were from the municipality and very few from the Mat-Su Borough. Just to review some of the comments we heard, the numbers in the left-hand column refer to issues in the issue response summary that was prepared for the May 18th public hearing, just to let you know that there is continuity in this, and many of the reasons are the same reasons that people gave in May. So I didn't prepare the same kind of issue response summary I did last time. I just captured the top 5 or 6 comments for each group. For those who offered general support for the bridge in the long-range plan, but not whether it should be in short-term or long-term, these were the top comments. Expected growth in Anchorage and Mat-Su Valley, mobility options having a second route for egress needed, beneficial economic impact, reduction in travel time north, that it's a more efficient link, and that the bridge will enhance safety and emergency response. And those are pretty much the same reasons for the people who specified it should be in the short term. Strong support again. 25 of those people had general support, no particular reason given, but other people thought it would be needed for the expected growth in the Anchorage and Mat-Su, mobility options, and also for the relief for the congestion on the Glen Highway. This middle ground of people with moderate support, people who are not crazy about the bridge, who said put it in the long term, these same kinds of comments were what we heard from people who wanted the bridge out. It's that it's not needed. We need to solve current problems. The bridge contradicts the Anchorage Bowl Comprehensive Plan, need to prevent sprawl, and adverse impacts on the Mat-Su Borough, the fact that we need responsible development in the Mat-Su Borough and under planning for needed infrastructure on both sides of the bridge. For people who said, yes, put it in the long term, the reasons were very similar. Cost, can't afford it. Cost estimates are misleading. Knickerham financing details, diversion of resources needed for higher priority projects, and that some people said the toll revenues will be insufficient and that the steep toll will be a disincentive for using the facility. 6 people said, too, that it wasn't needed. These are the same kinds of reasons we heard for the people who were in strong opposition to the bridge being in the plan. Very similar comments. Some new comments that we heard that we hadn't heard from before were not necessarily a lot, but we did hear them. The first one was from Kabata. They said that we had failed to account for the Mat-Su Borough comments. And we, for this amendment, we did specifically outreach to the City of Houston and the City of Wasilla to make sure that they got their say. We have included the Mat-Su Borough on our mailing list for over 1 year, but we wanted to make sure that Houston and Wasilla got the information as well. I'd like to point out that AMATS is not a tri-borough regional transportation planning organization. We're supposed to plan for the municipality of Anchorage, for the planning area of AMATS, which is slightly less than the municipality of Anchorage because it doesn't include Girdwood. I would also like to say that I provided a copy earlier of our public involvement log during the work session to the Planning and Zoning Commissioners. One of the criticisms was that we had not been following our own public involvement plan. And I did talk with Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration, and they were both satisfied that we had. So other comments in support of putting the bridge in the short term was that it's an unnecessary and detrimental process, and Kabata opposes any action that would in any way alter the pending ROD or NEPA process or delay or deny the project benefits to the public. Somebody else said the bridge would be good for our image. Somebody else said the state could view the municipality of Anchorage actions as reflecting the non-support of state desires, which could bite us in the future since the state ultimately has the authority of what gets built in this state. So they're afraid of retribution. Somebody else said we have built toll routes before, so this isn't the first blush for something new. Dropping the Knickerham to a later date in the AMATS listing is akin to deletion. And any reduction in real property values will merely reflect a correction in an inflated situation. The City of Houston wrote us a letter. They have already been positively affected by the Knickerham Crossing project through property and land sales, job stabilization in real estate market, increased sales taxes, indications that business owners intend to move or start new additional businesses in Houston, and that capital improvement projects and priorities established to manage anticipated traffic increase has been done. Okay, for the people who aren't crazy about the project, some new reasons were that the toll revenues will be insufficient. I think 6 people made this comment. We've experienced this with the Whittier Tunnel. The state has to supplement maintenance costs now. The same firm that made the glowing traffic projections for the Whittier Tunnel is the one that's done the traffic projections for the Knickerham Crossing. That gave them pause for reflection. Someone else said if the Mat-Su Borough communities want this project, they should provide the necessary funding. Other comments, I think there were 3 that were similar, is that Kabata has become a self-perpetuating institution, and the bridge would be detrimental to Wasilla. Next steps are that tonight we're having the public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission with possible action for the first week in December. Then in November, on November 17th, there is an AMATS joint work session with the Policy Committee, the Technical Advisory Committee, and Kabata. It's to go over new information and issues that are of interest to the municipality of Anchorage. And it's an opportunity for Kabata to share new information, new research that they've been doing on rail compatibility of the bridge, those types of things. So we'll probably have a technical advisory committee meeting in December, an assembly introduction on December 1st, and an assembly public hearing possibly on the 15th, and the AMAT's policy committee meeting in January for final approval. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Underwood. Mr. Isham, you're first in the queue.
Ms. Underwood, these 147 comments, were they written or were they verbal, or how did you get them?
That's a good question. I should have let you know. They were comments that we have received. They were written. Most were emailed to us. We did get some hard copy comments, and these were comments that were provided. We did not put it's not a poll or a survey that we did, but I think it shows very clearly that the people who did comment knew what the issue was.
Okay, were any of them? Were any of the words extracted from these things where it said support the Nick Arm crossing, it's time to get involved? Was that part of them also? These things that were included,
Oh, those are the comments verbatim. Those are the hard copy comments that were received.
Okay, so that's included in the 147?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pease.
Yes, I have one comment and one question. I guess I do appreciate your analyzing the comments. That saves us a lot of tallying individually. I guess I also think that this tally should be carefully prefaced with the fact that this wasn't a poll.
Right.
When you get a lot of numerical analysis like this, it begins to look as if there should be some great significance to it. And since we don't know which side solicited comments and with what information, it's hard to judge sort of whether we have anything statistically meaningful here or not. So I do appreciate it, but I think there should be a very careful preface to the apparently numerical analysis. And my question also has to do with numerical analysis of a different sort. I was drawn to a letter provided to us from the Mat-Su Borough from several years ago, and it tallies a lot of the costs that the Mat-Su Borough feels it would incur as a direct result of induced traffic and population shift from the Nick Arm crossing. And I'm wondering whether our body should take that into consideration in our next resolution, because if we're going to be spending public funds on any part of the project or the support services, does AMATS not dip out of the same pool as the Mat-Su Borough with regard to state and federal funding for transportation projects on the other side? And Mat-Su has identified 10 new schools, 6 new fire stations, and so forth. So that's a question, and if we do need to look at the costs which would compete with Anchorage projects, then I guess I would like a little more analysis of the induced costs for bringing a rural area up to an urban level on the other side.
Okay. Any further questions by commissioners?
Yeah.
Was that a yes, Mr.
Yeah.
Weddleton? Okay.
Directed to Mr. Wilbur. In the packet that we got, there's an outline of the projects in the LRTP going through your Chapter 13, and then also the sources of revenue and so on. Can you highlight any significant changes since we saw that in May?
Through the chair, there are no significant changes from the one that you saw previously.
Okay, so the methodology and the projects and so on is essentially the same?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions from commissioners? Okay, hearing none, before I open the matter for public testimony, I just want to clarify that this evening, the Planning Commission is on this matter sitting as the Citizen Advisory Committee to AMATS. And our role as the Citizen Advisory Committee to AMATS is described in it's shown on the AMATS organizational chart, and it's also described in the Intergovernmental Operating Agreement for Transportation and Air Quality Planning. And this is the intergovernmental agreement that many of you are probably familiar with. It's the one that the state of Alaska and the municipality of Anchorage enter into with regard to the AMATS Metropolitan Planning Organization. And we have our very own little section of this called Section 5.4. And our role as I'm going to read it into the record. The municipality's Planning and Zoning Commission shall provide a public forum for and advisory reports to other AMAT committees and groups and officials in its review and consideration of citizen comments and recommendations on suggested transportation and air quality plans and programs. As a body representative of the community at large, the municipality's Planning and Zoning Commission shall provide land use advice and transmit advisory recommendations on the AMATS LRTP for the Anchorage Bowl and Chugiak Eagle River areas and the TIP to the Assembly and the Policy Committee prior to final Assembly review and recommendations and Policy Committee final approval. And the Planning and Zoning Commission also will consider, and then it has a list of other transportation-related plans. And so this evening, this is the hat we're wearing. We're not in our traditional role of rezoning a property or approving conditional uses or long-term other land use plans. If you are representing a group or organization, you are allowed 5 minutes for your testimony. Do we have a problem? No, we don't have our little box for time. We're having a lot of technical challenges this evening. See how we do things in Anchorage? Anyway, if you're speaking on behalf of a group or organization, you're allowed 5 minutes for your presentation. If you're speaking as an individual, you will be allowed 3 minutes. And commissioners may ask you questions after your presentation, so wait around and I'll ask commissioners if they have questions for you after your testimony. So our public hearing is open, and I would invite the first person who would like to speak to come forward. And don't everybody run all at once. But someone needs to come forward first, especially those of you that have a long drive home. We welcome you.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Nemec. I'm the Executive Director for the Kinnicon Bridge and Toll Authority. A couple of things we heard earlier. First was that the Anchorage Assembly directed the AMATS to delete the project or remove the project, and that's not true. Originally, this all started with the Assembly asking AMATS to consider whether the project should remain in or come out. And I know that's been perpetuated over time. The other thing is I hear that the municipal employees or even this body have indicated that the responsibilities are limited to what happens within the municipality or within the MPO boundaries. And in fact, AMATS and this body, along with The Assembly should be concerned about transportation to, from, and within the community, and I think that's important. The commuting public to Anchorage, I mean, that's responsible for a large part of the economy here. With that being said, Cabada continues to object to the ongoing effort to utilize the federal planning process, which is vested in AMATS, to manipulate the NEPA process. We believe any community concerns are more productively resolved by communicating with us and also the state of Alaska. The state of Alaska and the Federal Highway Administration can answer a lot of the questions that are being answered by municipal employees. On October 8th, the Cabada Board of Directors passed a resolution unanimously to retain the project in the short-term portion of the LRTP. That board is represented by 3 public members, the commissioners of the Department of Transportation and the Department of Revenue, and there are also 2 non-voting members of the legislature, one from the House and one from the Senate. And in summary, and I believe that was already up on the screen, Cabada's board and members of the state administration are opposed to any action by AMATS that moves a project from a timeline that would in any way alter the pending record of decision, the NEPA process, or delay the project's benefits to the public. There is no reason to amend the LRTP. There's a new LRTP that's required in 2011, and in fact that process will probably begin in 2010. The proposed amendment will not stop work on the Kinnicum crossing, and there are some potential detrimental consequences, and some of those we don't know yet. There is the potential of payback. There is potentially a delay of the record of decision, which is just, that's not in the interest of the public or the state of Alaska. Potentially, there could be significant additional public funds at risk if we're pushed into doing additional environmental work because of a delay, a political delay. Those are public funds that could be utilized to advance the project or for other purposes. On October 28th and 29th, the Alaska State Chamber met, and they set their legislative priorities. A position statement supporting construction of the crossing was passed 16-2 on the floor, and when the board met, they passed that position statement unanimously, and in fact there were 20 positions that were deleted. I guess I'd like to reiterate that it is not the role of AMATS nor the municipal planning regulations to influence the environmental process. And Cabada is committed and we're funded to complete the NEPA process by obtaining a record of decision. That is our focus. And we are also prepared to design and construct the project following the record of decision. If I have some more time regarding fiscal constraint, I would just mention, and there'll probably be some other comments on that today, that the state of Alaska and the Federal Highway Administration do have some concerns about fiscal constraint. And I believe if this body has questions, they should get those answers from the state of Alaska DOT headquarters and or the Federal Highway Administration. And in fact, there was some discussion about the revenue sources of the LRTP and consistency with the statewide plan. And in fact, the revenue sources being used for the LRTP amendment that aren't even being utilized by the statewide plan. And with that, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. There may be some questions for you. Just a moment. Mr. Weddleton.
Thanks. So, I don't know, did you state that you're here speaking on behalf of Cabada? Is that right? I think
yes,
you gave your name.
I'm with the Kinnicum Bridge and Toll Authority.
Okay. Looking at the comments here, kind of the general flow of it is critique of the fiscal constraint of the new amended LRTP. So if it were shown that it's not fiscally constrained, then where does that leave us?
We bring that up as an issue that potentially affects other projects. Like I said, there is no need for an LRTP amendment. In fact, I would ask the question, what is the purpose? At one time I asked Lance, and he said, we're just here to delay the project, or that's the purpose of this amendment. We know there's a flaw in the fiscal constraint. I mean, fiscal constraint is an issue that the AMATs, the MPOs have to struggle with, and in fact the state of Alaska has to struggle with. And we're not necessarily trying to make it difficult for AMATs. We're simply bringing that up as a flaw and potentially has effect on other projects. If it's found that it is not fiscally constrained, it could be that additional projects have to be removed from the LRTP. And there are other arguments that say, I mean, this is a project of regional significance. We have other arguments, and we're saying in a lot of other respects that you can't just simply remove a project. I mean, part of what we hear from the municipal employees is that we're trying to influence NEPA. That is not the role of an MPO. And I don't think FHWA and the state of Alaska have weighed in completely. In fact, I mean, there's other parts of the regulations that we believe should be followed, and that is continuing cooperation with the state of Alaska and entities like Kabata. And that is not occurring. We hear at times that there's been meetings that Kabata has been present at. That doesn't mean we're having an ongoing conversation or talking about issues. And we have many times recognized that there are valid issues out there, and we should be discussing those. And I would like to be on the high road and being able to discuss the benefits of this project to the community. And if there's concerns of the community, we should be addressing those as we develop the project. And it's unfortunate that we haven't had those opportunities because we're in situations like this where we're always confrontational, and it shouldn't be that way in developing a project like this.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
No, I don't think so, actually. I mean, looking at your comments, that's the bulk of it, is that it's a critique of the LRTP for not being fiscally constrained. And I go through this and read on both sides. I don't understand. How does that relate to the bridge?
I still don't understand your question.
Well, if the LRTP, the amended LRTP is not fiscally constrained, then what happens? Then...
Well, if it is not fiscally constrained?
Right, which is your point in quite a number of pages here.
Well, if it's not valid, then you can't create a TIP based on it. And in fact, it won't be approved. The TIP and the STIP have to be conforming. And it's true that FHWA and DOT probably don't have a final stamp of approval on LRTP, but it is required for air quality conformity. And you can't have air quality conformity. They require a whole new analysis if you have to pull projects out to be with a fiscally constrained plan. So that would require, I mean, it does ultimately require FHWA and FTA to sign off, and I believe it's on their quality conformity and the final TIP. So you're not going to get a TIP. You can't, you know, the LRTP is one thing, it's a planning tool, but you also have to have a TIP that has to conform with the STIP. This project is in the STIP. It's funded. And if this body creates documents that have this project removed, then ultimately the state of Alaska is going to make a determination. And I think ultimately it goes to the governor's office. But if it's not a fiscally constrained plan and it's found not to be, then you're not going to have a TIP based on it. And basically, it's not going to go forward. The LRTP will not be amended. It will be as it is today.
Okay. And then that leads to another nagging thought is that I think the points on the LRTP not being fiscally constrained is pretty much grounded on the uncertainty of future funding. I think you made that point that the plan shows some sources of state funds that are programs that aren't yet created. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So wouldn't that uncertainty also exist with the existing LRTP?
No, I don't believe those revenue sources are being used for the current LRTP. In fact, I know they're not.
Okay, but doesn't the current LRTP have exactly the same list of projects as we see in the amended one? I have a question. I'm going to direct that to Mr. Wilbur.
Through the chair, Commissioner Weldon, the existing long-range transportation plan has the same list of projects. The difference is, as a requirement of this amendment process, we had to redo our financial plan, and we had to deal with cost increases and projections in inflation. In the current LRTP, those two items are not dealt with in the financial plan. As a result of this amendment process, the Federal Highway Administration requires us to redo our analysis. We have the same list of projects, but as a result of doing it with inflation, new funding sources are identified through this amendment process, as I think Mr. Nemec had alluded to. So when we did this amendment, there were things that were required. One was the bridge itself, and the other was a new financial analysis of our entire long-range plan. So that is why it's brought up through this process here. So this amendment does identify new funding sources to make our plan financially feasible.
Okay, one
more quick one, because I have other people in the queue.
So the existing LRTP is shown to be fiscally constrained, but only because it uses methods for costing the projects that are no longer considered valid. Is that correct?
Through the chair, if any MPO creates a new long-range transportation plan or does a major amendment to its plan, the method in which you do the financial analysis is different than it is when the existing 2007 LRTP plan with the Knik arm in it was done. So new requirements, new methods.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Pease.
Thank you. A couple of questions. If the LRTP were not fiscally constrained, wouldn't that make it even more speculative or risky to undertake the Knik arm crossing, given that the state's being asked to pay for Phase 2 or being asked to support the initial financing of Phase 1?
Well, first of all, the funding for the Knik arm crossing is actually not the same funding. The federal funds that are being utilized today are not the same funds that are being utilized by EMATS. We're not using any EMATS funding for the project, nor is it intended to use any EMATS funding in the future. I think there was, through the LRTP, a small amount of funding that was shown from EMATS to participate, and I think in some sort of a traffic study, but I'm not positive on that in the future. Tollback revenue is going to support the construction of and the operation of the Knik arm crossing.
And on the subject of tollback revenue, are you still assuming a $5 starting toll for passenger vehicles and $18 for commercial vehicles?
We haven't set initial toll rates. There has been some studies that were based on $5, but also studies that range, I think, anywhere from $3.50 to over $8. So I'm not sure what you're looking at there.
I'm looking at the page of information, I believe, it was put on our desk tonight. I believe it's from Lois Epstein. Yes, her name is on it. It said that the starting tolls that's what the starting tolls would be projected by Wilbur Smith, and that there would be $6 million net revenue in year one. Is that what you're going by?
Well, maybe you should ask Ms. Epstein. I don't know where she got her numbers.
Okay.
Maybe we should hire her as a financial consultant.
Well, I'd be interested to know what your finances say compared to hers, because we're getting one side of it here on this sheet, and it claims that with a $5 toll, you could only support $110 million in bonds. So the state or a private partner would have to put up $540 million of the $650 million in Phase 1, and that would be very much in contrast to what is now required, which is that no state or municipal funding be spent.
Well, I find it interesting that, that's like a fine line that's drawn in the sand. I mean, to tell you the truth, if the state legislature wanted to write a check for this project, this body, AMATS, is not going to tell the legislature they can't fund this project any way they want to. That's not our plan, but there are a lot of ways to develop this project. There are a lot of ways to finance this project. We do have somebody here that's much more qualified than I am to answer financial questions, and I'm sure he would be more than happy to answer your question.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Mr. Isham, were you in the queue at some point?
I backed out.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton, do you have another question?
Oh, I do. An appendix to a letter that is in our packet, if you're not the one to answer this,
Pardon?
If you're not the one to answer this, maybe we could pass this on to someone else, but it says the June 15th, 2009 Planning and Zoning Resolution 2009-31 found the LRTP was not financially constrained. While it was the intent of the resolution to show that the Connect Arm Crossing project was not constrained, it inadvertently shined a light on the remainder of the LRTP that is not constrained, while the KAC project is financially constrained. Could you tell us how that worked?
I think we have a person that would be better.
Okay.
I think it had to do with the question that was asked of EMET staff, I believe, at one of your previous meetings. It was related to fiscal constraint of the Connect Arm Crossing, that the same test should be used for the rest of the LRTP, and I believe we agree with that. We do have a project that's fiscally constrained, and that same test should be utilized for the remainder of the program.
Okay. If anyone else is looking, it's page 10 of our packet, the last full paragraph.
Okay. Well, maybe when the correct person comes up, they will address that
Thank you.
in their testimony. Thank you, sir. Would the next person that would like to testify? Yes, sir. If you could state your name for the record.
My name is Jamie Kenworthy, and I'm representing myself. I've worked with the people fighting the bridge. I live in the hillside, and I've done the financial analysis. And let me give you a copy. It should be in your packet, but I'm not sure what's in your packet and what isn't.
Okay. We've got it.
Since you don't have a financial analysis of the bridge from Cabada, I thought what I would do as a citizen volunteer is take the numbers that have been out there by third parties and construct a case of what the impact of the bridge would be. So I said phase one would cost $686 million, which is what the independent estimator, the National Contractors Group, told the state. They contracted with them to do an estimate of the bridge. And I assumed that of the $60 million that are left in Cabada's original $103 million, they would take $36 million of that, and so the amount of the bridge to be financed was $650 million. Now, if you amortize that over 37 and a half years, you could just do this with mortgage calculators. If you're buying a house, you're just adding 3 extra digits. And you assume very optimistically that you're going to get a 4.3% tax-exempt yield on the bonds, and it's highly rated. That leads to debt service, basically, of $35 million a year to pay off the bonds. Now, I took the costs for toll operations and O&M, operations and maintenance and toll operations, from the 2005 Wilbur-Smith study. And that study basically said $5 toll linear to the revenue, and that they would raise those tolls at 2.5% a year. So just basically taking those assumptions. Now, for revenue, I took what the U.S. Department of Transportation did with the Cabada TIFIA bond application, and took those revenue numbers. They just did 19 years of revenue, which is why my spreadsheet in the back is only 19 years. They took basically the revenue of what it would be. So basically, and I added $2 million a year for original Cabada administration costs. Maybe that's moved onto the state budget, maybe it isn't. But let me give you the bottom line. And that's where you basically say that in the first year of the bridge operation, with revenue of $13 million, and the costs I've outlined, you're running a $29 million operating deficit. which is more than Amex receives, as you know, in any one year. And the cumulative deficit over 3 years is about $70 million compared to the $22 million a year you get. So basically, if the federal transportation money for roads, trails, public transportation, and highways doesn't change, you're basically going to spend in the first 3 years the amount of money you're now receiving. And the number.
Your time is up, but I think there'll probably be some questions for you. Mr. Yoshimura?
I was wondering if you could just continue on and regarding your presentation. I'd like to hear more.
Okay.
I'm pretty much through my assumptions, but there's a couple more facts that come out of this. If you ask the question based upon the estimates of the revenue and the cost drawn from the Wilbur-Smith study, how much of the bonds could be financed, and that's where you get the number. Basically, if you have only, if you have only $6 million net revenues over cost to pay debt service, that's only going to finance $110 million of bonds at an optimistic 4.3% rate. I mean, that's just calculations you could do as if you're paying off a mortgage. So if the state or a private partner would in effect have to show up with $540 million of the $650 million price tag in order for the project to break even in the first year. Now, it's up to you and Amex to figure out whether that's likely to happen. Now, the reason I did not put a private partner in this, and I originally got into this 2 years ago, and I looked at what the City Global Markets did for an original projection. A private partner, they assume, would have a over 15% internal rate of return, which is basically saying if they're going to put money in, what's the internal rate of return they're going to expect to earn per year over the life of the project. And that number is 15%. So they're putting in $86 million the first time, $60 million the second time. But basically, more money would have to come out to the private partner than goes in, and that just makes the numbers worse. So I think that's why I think it's reasonable to basically say, where's the money going to come from if there's not a private partner, and to look at the real numbers. And one last comment. When the Chamber finally approved it, they said everything else that's been tested by Dittman poll saying 70% support the bridge. The key caveat was that the state or the public would not have to pay to construct the bridge. Well, we have to look at the numbers in order to say whether the state or the public and where that money is going to come from. I think that's a function of a planning commission or an Amex advisory committee. If you do this, what else can't you do?
Thank you. Ms. Pease?
Yes, I have a couple of questions. We heard earlier that the State Chamber of Commerce itself voted in approval. I don't know when that was, but what was taken. Did they have any information? Did you or someone similar make a presentation of this sort of information that showed the necessity, the strong likelihood of necessary public funding?
What I mailed to Ted Owens of the Executive Committee of the State Chamber, but I didn't go to the meeting, was basically this spreadsheet. What Lois and I did after that was to add the Phase 2 costs. So the project's losing money for 10 years, and then, of course, you have the issue of Phase 2. So it's the exact same thing. I don't have no idea why the State Chamber, when they finally put this resolution out, put that key caveat about if there's no, we support the bridge, providing the state doesn't have to put any money in. And this is an important issue, because if the state has to guarantee the bonds, then what is the definition of a private partnership? In other words, if the private sector, which I think it would be great if the private sector takes risks, but if if the private partner is going to say there's such a shortfall of toll revenue, we need a state guaranteeing the bonds, then that money is going to come out of the transportation budget, and it's up to more politically connected heads than mine to figure out how much of that comes out of Anchorage's hide.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton?
Thanks. I'll just make sure on the same thing. This 19-year pro forma Connect Bridge financials, is that what you're referring to?
Yes. Yes, that's what I provided to Amex, which is the same thing I'm giving you tonight. I just added Phase 2. And in Phase 2, I basically took the FHA estimate of $835 million, gave it a 4.3 interest rate, and took that over 37 and a half years. And that's why you got the higher debt service numbers in year 11.
Oh, okay. I didn't look at that. Looking at what was in our packet, I mean, it looks like, just looking at Phase 1 then, there's losses early on and they decrease and then it becomes pluses. But, that's not that unusual for a big project where you're losing money up front and then things get rolling and for many, many years you're making money. Is that right?
That's true, but in year 10, if you have to do, where's the money going to be to basically add the 2 lanes, add the pedestrian, add rail, do the AC couplet? I mean, none of that has Cabota taken responsibility for its projections, and they don't even actually have a projection for Phase 1 either. But those are all real costs, and there will be real issues about how much a priority that is and all the things you want to do in Anchorage.
Okay, thank
so in that analysis, you never make money on the bridge.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Yoshimura.
No, I used to manage I used to do seed capital for the Alaska Science and Tech Foundation. I been up here since '95, and so I was dealing basically with early stage technology-based businesses. But I would suggest that any person in the Planning Commission, you don't have to be a CPA. I'm an investor. That's how I make my living. But you can just put these numbers into your own spreadsheets. And just take the Wilbur-Smith numbers on cost and take the federal numbers on revenue and take what a bond payment would be and do what I would expect a state agency should do, which is provide you a financial feasibility statement. They haven't done that. They spend $2 to $3 million a year. I know something about that, so I used to run a small state agency, and I thought as a citizen I should do that for you because an enormous amount of planning and litigation and expense has gone through, and I don't think that should have happened unless they can put forward a financial statement that says how the project's going to add up and people can examine it. So that's why I just sort of stepped forward into this.
You indicated that you represented a volunteer organization, or?
No, I've worked with the people from Government Hill fighting the project. They just said, look at these financial statements. I've done it as a total volunteer basis. But I came up with a spreadsheet, and when I sat down with Lois and did the footnotes, we added Phase 2. That's the only change from what was submitted to Amex to this. So these are my numbers. I'll take responsibility for them.
Thank you.
Ms. Pease.
Yes, Mr. Kenworthy raised a good point. Why do we not have a financial feasibility statement that someone with a financial background in the state or the municipality has looked at and endorsed? And shouldn't we?
I think that's a fair question for them, but there's 2 parts of this. If they're going to say it's a private partnership, then they could do a simple spreadsheet showing the private investment and what they would have to earn to be investors. If there's not going to be a private partnership and the state has to guarantee the bonds, that's also a simple 2-page statement. But let them speak for themselves.
I guess then I would forward that to Mr. Wilbur or Ms. Underwood.
Through the chair, Commissioner Pease, I think the analysis and the information that we have used for the Knik Arm Crossing has really been kind of at a planning level, and it's based on the information that we've received from the project sponsor, which is Knik Arm Bridge and Toll Authority. And so that analysis for their public-private partnership is the information we are using for the financial feasibility of the Knik Arm Crossing. So any changes in that or analysis of that, the staff has not done. We were using the information from the project sponsor. So since the project itself would stand on its own merit and its financial feasibility doesn't affect the rest of the LRTP network, I think the analysis here that's been shown is not something the staff has done, though it is informative. But I think similarly, the Knik Arm Bridge and Toll Authority has done a similar analysis, but they project out, and I think their projection is out to 40 or 50 years with the different bond ratings and mix of revenue. So We have not, at a staff level, done this amount of analysis on the Kinnick Arm Crossing. Frankly, we haven't done this amount of analysis on any project in the LRTP because we're looking at a planning level, so we want to make sure that our analysis for both projects is equal.
Okay.
Through the chair, given that this project in particular has a caveat on it in the long-range transportation plan put there by INETS, by the Assembly, that there be no public expense be incurred, I think it's important to have a governmental position that the numbers show whether or not there will be any need for public funding. And Mr. Kenworthy's analysis to a layperson implies very strongly that there would be public funding or public backing, and therefore it wouldn't meet the constraints required of it in the LRTP. So I think it's time for a 2-page spreadsheet of financial feasibility analysis.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Miss, just a moment. We have more questions. Sir, we're not done yet. Ms. Yoshimura.
Well, actually, I don't have a question for this
Okay.
gentleman. I just have a comment, which is, I guess, born of my general frustration, is that I've been on the Planning and Zoning Commission for a year now, and we have seen several cases, not really related to this, but that has, where we don't get an opportunity to examine or question the financial feasibility of a project. And I don't think that there's been a single rezone that this commission has done that has actually gotten off the ground and built or under construction in the past year. And the reason for that is that we don't have financial feasibility. And I don't believe as a commission we are authorized, or it's part of our mission to, when these things come before us, whether it's this long-range transportation plan and Kabata or a planning and zoning case, there's no opportunity for us to examine the financial feasibility. So I just have to say that.
Okay. Well, that's
Thank you.
comments
I know.
opportunity. Ms. Pizzo, are you back in the queue? Good, because I'm going to acknowledge Mr. Isham, who's been patiently waiting here.
My only comment to Ms. Yoshimura is the fact that
Sir, I think you can sit down.
is that we don't consider finances when we're making decisions on land use.
I understand that. It's
time
very
to-
frustrating.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
But the fact of the matter, that's the rules of the game.
Yes.
But I think,
We should look at the use.
and then the comment here is that we're not sitting in that same situation. We're as a Citizens Advisory Committee, so I would assume we
We're wearing a different hat here. Okay. Moving along, friends and neighbors. Who's next?
Good evening. Roger Purcell, Mayor of the City of Houston. I want to thank you for the opportunity to come forward and talk a little bit
Could you
today.
say your name again, just a little?
Roger Purcell, P-U-R-C-E-L-L, Mayor of the City of Houston. And coming forward today to talk on a few different of the issues, and like I said, I appreciate the opportunity to come forward. While AMAS is tasked with addressing the increased transportation issues, their failure to analyze the impact of transporting projects out of city limits defeats the whole purpose of the transportation planning. Now, AMAS itself, whenever it comes to anything inside the city like a side road in those side areas, is correct. There should be any other comments. But in the actual contract they have with the state of Alaska, if it's regional, then they must include all regional areas. And that's in your contract with the state of Alaska to have the privilege of being able not to have a CIP list, but to directly apply for funding from the state for road projects. In this case here, for the Kinnick Arm crossing, it's going to move large volumes of traffic across and freight goods service from Anchorage, Houston, the Matsu Valley, all and beyond up to Fairbanks and that. At no time has the staff from AMATS ever, and this is included with the comments, sat down with us to work over the actual impact that it has in our area. You saw some of the stuff today when they came forward and they talked to you on their little proposals. The first one I want to discuss is the skewed plan that they're using, and that is the slow trend of rapid growth inside the Mat-Su Valley. From 2007 to 2009, we've gone from 17,000 vehicles to over 19,000 vehicles a day coming into Houston. From that, over 14,000 of them continue on past Houston all the way up towards Fairbanks. And those are vehicle traffic that could be coming through that are headed up north through our town each and every day of the week. We are now considered the third most congested road in Alaska, right behind Tudor Road here in Anchorage. So we do have something a little bit in common here, and when DOT starts putting their numbers together, we start being compared to Anchorage. Even though we're a small community size-wise in population, we do have the heavy traffic flow. Out of that, when they start saying that we are slowing the growth area, the skewed, what I'm talking about is the actual fastest growth in the valley is Connecticut Bay, Houston, Big Lake, and I want to apologize, I've been fighting a cold here for a couple of weeks, and it just doesn't seem to be going away, and the Meadow Lakes area. This is where the rapid growth in the valley is. But yet when you did your transportation study from the city, because they are not working with us in the valley in that on doing the regulations, they took the whole borough, which is the size of Wyoming. The growth factor inside the areas like in Sutton, past Palmer, Trapper Creek, and those areas, they are not growing as fast as they were at one time, but we still are, and we're continuing to grow. I know Ms. Pease asked the questions about the Mat-Su Borough with the growth of the fire stations and the schools, and we're already building those. We've already built 3 fire stations, ambulance stations, or in the process of doing it since when she was talking about. We've built 2 more schools in this area. Whether this bridge gets built or not, we are still going to be competing against the city of Anchorage for those funds because we are growing at that rate of area. The last resolution for the Mat-Su Borough that was done was in full support of the bridge. Okay, that was the whole assembly voting in for. That's the stance that the borough has taken and has not changed. Individuals and their staff may have changed their minds, but the actual fact of the matter is the borough still supports the growth area. It was interesting how you said, I'm talking about the funding in that. I'd really like to see what the highway-to-highway breakdown is, since it's not a toll road, as much as you guys want to spend building a bridge under the city, and that how much loss it's going to be to the state and to the public when you guys want to go forward and ask for federal and state funding for something that really benefits Anchorage the most of anybody, due to the fact is you're going to be saving your commercial property. Instead of condemning land and widening the road out for the congestion, you want to go underneath. And you're asking us in Houston and the Valley to help support you on this, but yet you're not wanting to support us for the bridge that comes up to our side. I think that's a little skewed here when you start asking those type of areas for the city. As far as the comments in your staff, they said it was almost 50-50, but yet, if you take a look at the comments on the flavoring, it was 64% in strongly or more in favor to 34%. That's not a 50-50. That's a strong support. That tells me your staff itself is skewing the numbers to you to try to get it to lean more towards putting a long-term plan. And I guess that's my time.
You can sum up, sir.
Summing up all the way on the fact is when we took the lawsuit on to the city, and that's because the city of Anchorage and their staff violated several major AMATS agreements, federal law, state law, in allowing us the opportunity to come forward. And I still believe you are, and I still believe the city is, and the fact is that they have not come forward at this time to work on their comprehensive plan to showing them the projects. And I still maintain that fact that there's been no meetings with the group from the Anchorage with our city staff and that, working on a long-term comprehensive plan for the growth of the transportation plan. Thank you.
Okay. Looks like we have several folks that have questions for you, Mayor. Mr. Isham.
Mayor Purcell.
Yes.
I've heard it twice from both yourself and Mr. Nemec this evening, the statement that AMATS should be looking or has responsibility to look beyond our own boundaries of the municipality. And yet I've been told, that we have to look after ourselves and we should sort of put on blinders. And as I understand it, AMATS is not a regional transportation planning authority, but it's for the municipality. So could you go over again what you said so I can understand, because you seem to imply that it's written somewhere or the agreement is somewhere there that they're supposed to act like a regional transportation authority. So if you could go over that again for me, please.
Yeah. When we brought the lawsuit forward, what it comes down to, when it comes to the streets inside of Anchorage and the area, yes, AMATS does not have any responsibility. So in other words, if they're just building a normal street inside the city, they have no responsibility. When you get an AMATS type situation, it's like the borough and the cities are looking at right now, we agree with the state by getting a special privilege. In other words, when I write to go in, like I need to fix a road in the city of Houston, I have to decide, do I want a fire truck or do I want a road as being my number one priority for our city? I don't get an AMATS ability where I can say I need a fire truck and apply directly for a capital improvement project for a fire truck, and then I get a road project that gets just as much consideration as my fire truck because I don't have the AMATS ability. But in the flip side, in the contract that is actually wrote between the state of Alaska, federal, and AMATS, it actually says regional areas must include all affected areas in their discussion. It's right in the contract. So if you pull their contract and you look at it, it talks about the regional areas. Houston, Connecticut Bay Community Council, all of us are affected by this bridge. So when a compromise is made or they make an agreement to do something that affects the regional areas, they must, by law, include us in the discussion and the area. This has not been done. They've yet to have meetings. Now we get invited to speak, for a couple of minutes inside these different areas, but to sit down and look at what the impact is to our areas by not having it has not been done. And that is in their contract. And you can get a copy of the contract. Our attorneys have gone over it already, and in that lawsuit that we filed, those were the whole measures that we based our area on. The judge did agree with us because he continued on at that point, and the reason that they stressed that the restraining order wasn't given was because the vote had already been taken. There was no need at that point for a restraining order. And the reason we all got in and made an agreement is we didn't want to hold up your TIF, and I forget how many millions of dollars that would have cost the city of Anchorage. But the fact is that they did not bring us to the table and discuss what needed to be done with our communities for the long range and regional impact by taking this off the short-term plan. Did I answer your question?
Well, it gives me some more ammunition to ask our staff a question. May I direct a question?
Yes, you may.
Yes. Mr. Wilbur, what saith you?
Through the chair, Commissioner Isham, I believe the contract that the mayor is referring to is our operating agreement. Let me just start with that. Is that the one? It's basically how the municipality of Anchorage and the state of Alaska agree what we should do and the requirements based on the planning regs that say you will consider regionally significant projects, and if there's a regionally significant project, it must be included in your plan. I just want to make sure that's the documentation that the mayor is referring to.
Well, I have to pull all of our court documents again to make sure, but there is directly and federal and state requirements become an AMATS to allow you to have the autonomy of being directly applying for funds. There are federal and state guidelines, and in those guidelines do require regional areas for you to have direct dialogue with any community that has been affected by your plan, in which case you failed to do this. That's why we went in court the first time.
Through the chair, in the planning regs, looking at regionally significant projects is required. That is the whole reason why this LRTP amendment is in play, because the bridge is a regionally significant project. But it does not require a regionally significant project to be included if the MPO does not want it. It just says that if a regionally significant project is to be built, it must be included in the plan. So the other matter is, how does an MPO reach out beyond its boundaries to a more larger regional area, that would make sense. And I don't think there's any MPO that would disagree with that. You would want to know how your neighbors are influenced or impacted, or any adjustments they would need to make based on the actions of you. And that is why, whether or not we went out and had a community council meeting with the City of Houston, we did not do that. We did not have a community council meeting with the Borough Assembly. We offered them the same opportunity that we've done here in the Anchorage Bowl. The document has been available. This forum and others have been made available for folks to come and testify and make their concerns known. So I'm hoping I'm answering all the questions that Commissioner Isham asked and the mayor brought forward.
Yeah, well, it's interesting to hear interpretations, and that's what makes the world go round. But I guess my specific question, Mr. Wilbur, is that if we make decisions as the Citizens Advisory Committee, giving advice to AMATs, we really are tasked with looking after the municipality's interests, and we really sort of ignore the other things, even though they're there, but are we forced to ignore these outside things that impact on us?
Through the chair, I don't believe that you're forced to ignore them. I mean, obviously, these comments should not be ignored. I mean, they're important comments. But your actions and your recommendations as a Citizen Advisory Committee are to AMATs on the long-range transportation plan and their projects. So your focus is on, and the land use effects of any transportation project.
On Anchorage, yeah.
On Anchorage, and that is your primary focus.
Okay.
Okay, Ms. Yoshimura.
Mayor Purcell, you talked about the growth that you were experiencing in Houston, Big Lake, Meadow Lakes, and the Connect-Goose Bay area. And I was just wondering if you could be more specific statistically and where you got that information.
The ones I was just asking are the new transportation documentation that the state of Alaska has just published here in the last 3 weeks. That showed we went from over 17,000 and a few to over 19,300 to 14,400 past the Little Bridge, going on up into past us into Talkeetna, Fairbanks, and all in the new state of Alaska Department of Transportation. We're growing our area is growing at a 43%. That's under the census done by the Building Commission in our area. I know for the city of Houston alone, we increased a 300% increase just this last year on building permits inside the city. That's the growth area that we're going through. And of course, hopefully, eventually, with Burma Road going in and that, we'll have more numbers as it comes along.
300% is a really large percentage. Could you be specific in terms of the number of permits?
Well, the board just gave us a list of saying that the city of Houston's now up to 5,400 structures, which the last one we had, which is a huge increase for us of a town that just has, roughly 2,000 residents. But that means most of those are people that come in for the weekends, that live on the weekends and come out to the different lakes and the rivers and stuff. But we're growing in every subdivision inside the city at this time.
Thank you.
Our city is the same size as the Bowl of Anchorage. We're 23.5 square miles. So we're kind of a large area.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Pease.
Yes, I also had questions about the numbers of traffic. What really counts to us is the destinations of that traffic. So did the DOT figures, could you tell us what the source is, and maybe we can look at them ourselves, but also are you implying that's traffic that's coming from Houston or parts farther north all the way to Anchorage that would want to jump on that bridge, or is this some kind of local hub flow up to Talkeetna down to Wasilla? What relevance do those increases have to our decision?
Yeah. The large majority of them, especially, is through transportation that's going all the way through. It is the direct route to Fairbanks from Anchorage. This comes through the Parks Highway. So transportation for the military bases, for all from your port coming all the way through the truckers, all that area comes through our city. and through there. So those increases are from, as the area grows on both sides, but also a lot of it is the transportation that goes back and forth between Fairbanks and Anchorage, and the military bases.
So you're saying you saw destination studies, you saw the destinations of the traffic, that's what you're quoting?
I'm quoting this, from the Department of Transportation, yes.
2009.
That's a brand new one that just came out in 2008. It just came out in the last 2 weeks. Like I said, we went up over 2,000 vehicles in 1 year, additional daily traffic through our city.
Okay. Well, no one else is in the queue, Mayor Purcell, so thank you for coming all the way to Anchorage this evening to testify in person, and we appreciate getting your letter earlier today, so we had an opportunity to read it.
All right, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome, sir. Would the next person that would like to testify please come forward? Oh, there's a brave person in the back. Good evening.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Robert Shipley. I'm a resident of Anchorage, and specifically for this session here, I would like to say I'm a dedicated bicyclist and a frequent pedestrian and hiker. And I have a specific interest in this Amendment 13 to the long-range transportation plan, as I have just read over it today. My interest was because I heard a rumor just a couple of days ago that the reference in the amendment for the provision for associated cycling and pedestrian facilities had been removed from the initial transportation plan. And so that got my attention right away as a cyclist. And it seemed to be quietly removed apparently without any public hearings that I was aware of. So that did concern me. And in the telecommunication with the Municipal Traffic Department, to get a little more information, I got a general explanation that the amendment, although not real clear, that the intention was to remove the reference from the Phase 1 and leave it in the Phase 2, but which I understand could be up to 10 years after Phase 1, which doesn't do much good for those early years for cyclists and pedestrians interested in that across the water. I also found in reviewing it that there's no indication that such cycling and pedestrian amenities are included at all. And specifically, I refer to page 32, the charts, and page 35. There's one on page 32 under the Kinnicon plan. There's a reference to a sidewalk of 6.1 miles. But on page 35 under the Kinnick Bridge section, no reference to any kind of pedestrian cycling amenities. So it's a little confusing to me, a little unclear, and my evaluating of the amendment is it's pretty vague, and I guess the word is obtuse. It doesn't really commit itself to a lot of things. It just vaguely refers to it, and I understand that there was a legal settlement, and those proceedings may not have been fully divulged to the rest of us, but there is a lot of public money that could be involved, so that concerns me. Nevertheless, as a resident, I'm disturbed by what appears to be this preference given to the motorized traffic only, as opposed to this vision of multimodal, complete streets approach. Thank you.
Okay, there may be some questions for you. Let me check. Are there any questions from commissioners? Ms. Pease?
It's in response to Mr. Shipley's comment, I'm going to ask Mr. Wilbur to clarify whether, just confirm, I think we heard there is no sidewalk, but I did look at page 32 of the LRTP amendment, and it says length of sidewalk 6.1 miles on the 6.8-mile bridge. So what is the meaning of that?
Through the chair, our goal would be, assuming that if the project were to stay in here, and talking to the folks from Kinnick Arm Bridge and Toll Authority, the pedestrian facilities would be part of Phase 2 for the length of the bridge. So whenever that Phase 2 is done, that's when the pedestrian facilities would be added, and it would be done as Phase 2. I think the comment is that, maybe I misheard, that they should be part of Phase 1. But right now, we would want to be consistent with whatever the proposal is for the bridge. And so that's the consistency, is it be Phase 2.
Okay. Thank you. Anything further, Ms. Pease? No. Okay. Thank you very much for coming out this evening, sir.
Thank you.
Who is the next person that would like to testify? Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you. My name is Bob French, and I'm president of the Government Hill Community Council, and I'd like to speak on behalf of the Community Council. I appreciate the opportunity to again speak on the Kinnick Arm Bridge and would encourage you to again vote against its inclusion in the long-term transportation plan. I don't believe there are any changes to the overwhelmingly harmful effects to the Anchorage and also to the Mat-Su Borough that your 2007 and 2009 resolutions both recommending change or removal of the Kinnick Arm Bridge from the LRTP. The only real difference is that the current proposal before you is to postpone it instead of deleting it completely. I urge you to support moving the bridge to the long-term portion of the LRTP. The financial numbers that Jamie Kenworthy discussed used the actual toll and traffic forecast that Cabada got through the Wilbur Smith Associates. However, I believe those forecasts are highly speculative. Currently, there's about 13,000 one-way trips on the Glen Highway from the Mat-Su Borough every day. It's a one-way trip. Wilbur Smith's traffic forecast that Cabada is relying upon to pay for not only the design, construction, and maintenance of the bridge, but also for the future build-out of Phase 2, those traffic estimates that within 5 years after completion of the bridge, they will have an equivalent amount, about 13,000 one-way trips going every day over a two-lane bridge. The fact that it takes 4 lanes or 6 lanes to carry the same amount of traffic on the Glen Highway right now that Cabada thinks will fit on a 2-lane bridge shows how optimistic Wilbur Smith forecasts are. Since the bridge will not shorten the commute for the vast majority of the existing residents of the Mat-Su Borough, the idea that large numbers of existing residents will switch from taking the Glen Highway and move over to a 2-lane, unlighted, winding road that goes through the middle of a moose refuge, only to have to pay a toll once they get to the far side of that moose refuge, is just simply not credible. Therefore, Cabada is betting our state and local transportation dollars that a brand new town will suddenly spring up about the size of Eagle River in the Chugiak area, and that town will come out on Point McNowhere within about 5 years. That, too, is simply just not believable. The new community that Commissioner Pease spoke about earlier, and that the Mat-Su Borough is rightfully concerned about, where they need to build those 6 new schools, new fire, police stations, everything. We've seen how well the Mat-Su Borough has done in rejecting their bond proposals to build new schools. I urge you to recommend either deletion of the Kinnick Arm Bridge completely from the LRTP, or to move it from the short-term plan to the long-term plan portion of that LRTP. And I guess that's pretty much all. One other thing, if I do have some time. there were some questions earlier about what the Anchorage, the municipality of Anchorage had said regarding some of the financial projections on the bridge. And I don't have them in front of me, so I'm going to have to just kind of paraphrase it. But the Anchorage, in their comments on the draft environmental impact statement, said that essentially they believed that the traffic projections were faulty and that the current financial plan that Kabata had was not a recipe for a real financial plan. It was a recipe for a financial failure. So I'm sorry if I've totally mangled their comments, but you could go back to the Anchorage comments on the draft LRTP, and I'd be happy to provide those for you.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions from commissioners? Ms. Pease?
Yes, 2 questions. Those comments that you attempted to paraphrase were allegedly made by whom and when?
It was by the municipality of Anchorage, and Lance may be able to help a little bit on that, but it was during the comment period for the draft EIS, not on the finals.
Okay. And I had one other question.
Okay.
In your letter dated October 23rd, you included some conditions which you said would lead you to support moving the Kinnicon Bridge to the long-term projects portion of the LRTP. The one I wanted to specifically ask about was that there be a date certain that Kabata is given to work out the details of how the bridge will be designed and financed. Otherwise, they will keep spending money indefinitely. We've heard the city, or Mr. Wilbur and Ms. Underwood, say that it would be beneficial to stretch out the record of decision and keep working away on things. What benefit did you see from having a date certain, and could you just explain your request for a date certain?
Sure. I think the overwhelming reason is that right now Kabata has about $63 million, as was provided by Ms. Underwood. If Kabata ceases to exist and stops spending that $63 million, that $63 million could come to the rest of the state DOT and could be spent as seen fit by DOT. And I think that's one of the other concerns that we had as for Government Hill in particular is Kabata's proposal to not just dig up Government Hill and stick a 300-foot wide trench down through the middle of our city. They don't want to do that just once. They want to do it twice, about 10 years apart, once for Phase 1 and again for Phase 2. So I think, certainly the Planning and Zoning Commission has done a wonderful job of summarizing the effects to Anchorage as a whole, and I urge you to go back and do the same action you did earlier. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And there are no further questions, sir. Who is next? Let's just come right on down. I'd like to see a show of hands of how many more people would like to testify, because I'm going to have to gauge a break here. So be realistic, folks. Only 2? Okay. Yeah, 3. Okay.
Madam Chair, can I make a comment real quick?
Yes.
I just want to make it clear on this entire issue now. The city is basically the petitioner in this case. Is that correct? So having multiple people who represent Kabata is not a problem.
It's not a problem. We are the Citizen Advisory Committee to AMAPS, and we're going to hear whoever wants to come forward and talk.
Good. I wanted to make sure that was clear to everyone paying attention. Thank you.
No, anyone that wants to come forward can come forward. So, having said that, I'll re-ask for a show of hands of how many people want to testify. 1, 2, just 2. Okay. Yes, sir.
Good. That means we can all make it home and get some sleep tonight. My name is Kevin Hemingway. I'm actually the Chief Financial Officer of Kabata.
Okay.
And I have come to do some testimony about fiscal constraint, both with respect to the Kinnickinnic Crossing project and to the overall LRTP. I've got 25 years of experience in finance, accounting, and management. I'm originally from the private sector, almost an entire career is in the private sector, and I've completed well over $2 billion of financing transactions during my career. I know we have a lot of other experts in the audience, but I've worked in this area for my entire career. The Kinnickinnic Crossing is a fiscally constrained project. The Major Projects Financial Plan was submitted to the FHWA TIFIA Joint Projects Office, and after an extensive risk analysis, the TIFIA JPO recommended $261 million of subordinated credit for the Kinnickinnic project. That subordinated credit is subordinated or junior to a senior lien, so it's second in line to get paid. That also equates to about an $800 million project. Independent bankable traffic and toll revenue studies were conducted by Wilbur Smith Associates. They are the industry-leading traffic and revenue consultant. Those studies project, using a $5 initial toll for passenger vehicles, approximately $12.5 billion over 55 years. Numerous independent estimates of costs have been conducted by engineering firms and reviewed and evaluated by the FHWA as recently as this spring. And those are also included in the financial plan, and those financial plans are periodically updated to monitor financial feasibility under current real-world market conditions. Chapter 12 of the LRTP already places a condition on the Kinnickinnic toll bridge that does not permit it to move forward until financing for the entire Phase 1 of the project is in place. Future phases, including adding lanes and Ingrid Gamble or H2H connector, will be paid for using toll revenue from growing traffic. If traffic does not materialize, the added capacity and connectivity will not be needed. If it does materialize, funding for the project will be there and could even finance additional transportation projects in the region over the long term. This is a 75 to 100-year asset and could generate revenue for other future transportation projects. The financial plans for the Kinnickinnic toll bridge have been thoroughly vetted by the most highly regarded professional consultants, the FHWA, and the private firms competing for the project. These people are experts in the field. In the case of the private developers, they will also be risking their own money. One of the private firms, Bouygues Travaux, very recently closed on October 15th, just last month, the Port of Miami Tonal P3 project, which is a $900 million deal, is similar in size and scope to the Kinnickinnic Crossing. But everybody has to realize that no financial close can occur on a project like this until environmental clearance has been achieved. On the other hand, the financial plan for the rest of the LRTP is, in my opinion, not fiscally constrained. About $1 billion of the roughly $4 billion plan, or about 25%, is new revenue that is unlikely to be realized and for which no documented plan for ensuring its realization exists, as is required under federal regulations at 23 CFR 450. Cabata has submitted written comments regarding this issue, and I think you probably have them in your packet, and I know Mr. Weddleton referred to them. In the zeal to defer or kill the Kinnickinnic Crossing, Anchorage is opening up the LRTP to close scrutiny by FHWA earlier than necessary without having worked out embedded fiscal constraint issues. And the FHWA has made it abundantly clear that they'll be re-examining or examining closely fiscal constraint under the new regulations, and have already done so, as a matter of fact, with the recent state STIP update. Were it not for this proposed amendment to the plan, AMATS would have until 2011 to resolve funding issues with the state around those new revenue sources to meet fiscal constraint under the new regulations. And without fiscal constraint, as Mr. Nemec mentioned, air quality conformance is also jeopardized. The Kinnickinnic Crossing fiscal constraint has been evaluated by the FHWA and has been met. We'd be happy to cooperate, coordinate, and consult with the TAC to come in and actually see these plans. They're not a one- or two-page back-of-the-envelope spreadsheet. They're actually multiple pages and multiple scenarios, and they are periodically updated as recently as late last week. Holding the Kinnickinnic Crossing to a higher standard than the remainder of the LRTP is disingenuous. The LRTP is a planning stage document, and because of the other fiscal constraint issues, I urge planning and zoning and AMATS to defer any action to the amendment of the LRTP and to place its own house in order with respect to fiscal constraint. The consequences of not doing so are great, jeopardizing air quality conformance, about 25% of the projects in the plan in terms of cost, and further eroding public trust. Thank you.
Okay.
I had that sound pretty well, didn't I?
You sure did. Let's see if we have some questions for you, sir.
I suspect there will be some.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton, you're first.
Mr. Hemingway, did you get a chance to look at this paragraph in the appendix to the comments that were sent in that talks about the Planning and Zoning Commission's resolution from June 15th of this year that says that resolution said something convoluted that...
As I recall, the Planning and Zoning Commission resolution determined that Kinnick-Lawn was not fiscally constrained. How to arrive at that conclusion with the evidence that was presented, I'm a little confused about that, but I believe that our comment is it really shines a light on a different issue, which is the overall plan is not fiscally constrained. Were it not for this amendment, this would not have to go and be updated and meet the new requirements this soon, and it would give AMATS an opportunity to resolve those funding issues for the new revenue sources in cooperation with the state over a couple of years, and hopefully to be able to save most of the projects in the plan.
Did that answer your question?
Well, I don't think so, but if you don't have the paragraph in front of you, probably...
I don't have the paragraph in front of me, I'm sorry.
So, all right, thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Yoshimura?
A couple of questions. To your knowledge, do you know who would pay for the improvements on the other side of the bridge?
We, as the authority, have a limited scope, which is this project from termini to termini. That's basically about 9 or 10 miles up the road on the west side to Port McKenzie Road meets Burma and Kinnick Goose Bay, to the connections on the Anchorage side. However, because of the independent traffic and revenue studies, underneath of that is a socioeconomic study done by Insight Research Corporation. They're the industry leaders in the U.S. They do about 450 of these studies a year for government, sports teams, and other development projects. They were subcontracted by Wilbur Smith. They have indicated that there will be about, as a result of the increased economic activity because of the new economic corridor, that the borough would enjoy about $1.2 billion of tax increment as a result of the bridge that could be used to fund infrastructure improvements.
Over what period of time?
That's over approximately 23 years. That study is available on our website.
And then my second question is, in your opinion, would, under current financing conditions, would the proposed financing require the guarantee of the state of Alaska?
It's likely to require some type of credit enhancement, and the reason is that with the current financial markets, the spreads have widened for, say, a BBB credit, which is what this would be as a naked revenue issue. By providing a letter of credit backstop that would be repaid with toll revenues, you could actually reduce that or improve that credit rating to something like a single A plus or double A minus. That is one way to resolve some of the current financial market issues. What happens with a lot of the transactions that are occurring today is they actually use an availability payment structure where the state or the agency retains the toll revenue, and that also comes with that is you get a lower cost of capital on the equity component, but the state also gets the return on the upside for revenue.
What percentage of your cost do you think would be required for the state guarantee?
I actually believe none. I think that the guarantee would be a sleeves off of the vest, so to speak. In terms of lending the credit rating, I don't believe that the state would incur any liability that wouldn't be covered by those toll revenues.
And what if the toll revenues didn't meet your projections? Then what would happen?
We have run some sensitivity analysis, and at various levels, down to a certain level, it will continue to support the financing. It may be in technical default, but there would not be a payment default, down to about 56% traffic projection levels.
Which would amount to how many?
Well, the traffic grows over time. Initially, there's projected to be about 4,200 round trips a day. It's a very modest traffic. That grows to about 23,000 round trips a day over approximately the first 30 years. That's about the capacity of a 4-lane road. And at that point, we capped off the traffic because the roughly 46,000 is the practical capacity of a four-lane highway.
So at 4,200, is that a negative cash flow?
At 4,200, it's not negative cash flow, and the reason is that the shape of your debt service with a project like this is not like a conventional mortgage. It's not a flat payment that's the same every month or semi-annually. You can actually shape your debt service to match the revenue curve. Toll roads across the nation have had challenging times and or been wildly successful, but over the long term, because these are long-term infrastructure assets, they've almost always exceeded traffic projections from the original financing.
That sounds like a negative amortization. Is that what that is?
No, it's not a negative amortization. The debt service in the early years is very limited. There typically will be some accretion debt, which is, I guess, what you would be calling a negative amortization. That's where the interest is deferred and rolled into the instrument. But typically, it's interest only in the first several years, and then principal payments start to kick in and they ramp up as the road matures.
My concern would be that the interest-only payments would not be covered, that the toll revenue would not be sufficient to cover the interest.
I believe that that's probably an incorrect statement. I think the toll revenue will be sufficient to cover the interest with the debt profile structured the way we have done so in the financial models. And again, we are an open door. If AMAS would like to come and evaluate those models, we'd be happy to do so. But be very confident that these have been produced by industry experts, independent financial advisors, public financial management, city, Wilbur Smith Associates. There are a number of independent engineering firms. So the numbers that are going into these models have been vetted in real market conditions.
You know, I can really appreciate that, but I'm certain that you can understand the skepticism given the financial meltdown that this country has experienced in the past few years.
Yes, I can. I'm sure we've all felt it personally as well.
Yeah. Thank you. Ms. Pease.
Yes, I have two questions. I'm puzzled why it's not possible to give a distillation into a couple pages in layperson's terms, a simple financial picture that would show at what point you think the project would really kick in and become self-sustaining and then generate the billions of dollars projected for other projects. Well, why is it not possible?
That can certainly be done. That was never requested.
Well, I'd like to see it through the chair and through the AMAT's staff.
Do I have permission, Andrew? Okay.
And then the other question is, you mentioned the Wilbur Smith revenue projections over 55 years, and that's a long horizon for we're doing a 20-year LRTP generally here, and that's kind of what our land use plans are premised on, too. So I'd really be interested to see the revenues over 20 years and how that compares to the 2 pages that the loyal opposition presented.
Yeah, and I would also like to take a look at the loyal opposition and compare it myself, but we'd be happy to provide that information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
I'd like to go through a couple points that are in the resolution that we did in June.
Okay.
So hopefully you'll know. And one statement in this resolution says, Cabada currently has not sought private funding for an Ingra-Gamble connection and is seeking state financial backing for revenue bonds. Would that be correct today?
We have modeled funding for Ingra-Gamble. Typically, you won't procure or do a financial close on a project that's not going to be built for about 10 years, and that's about where the traffic projection indicates Ingra-Gamble will be needed.
So you haven't sought funding for it?
Pardon me?
You have not sought funding for that?
We have projected or modeled that there would be sufficient revenue to fund it. We have not sought the money for it because until traffic starts to develop, the timing of it is uncertain.
So the funding is tolls?
The funding is tolls, that's correct.
Okay.
I think there's a very small amount in the LRTP that you would program for a different solution to connect Ingra-Gamble, but it's a 10% or less of the component.
Okay, then it also says Cabada has provided no evidence of recent progress to enter a funding contract with either of two private financiers who expressed interest 2 years ago. One of the private partners that bid on the project had substantial financial setbacks in 2008. Is this a true statement today?
I'd like to speak to that with a little bit more background. I just mentioned that the Port of Miami Tunnel project, which is one of our prospective private partners, Bouygues Chauveau, closed just 15 or 20 days ago on a $900 million deal. That was actually awarded in 2000, I think it was in January of 2007, and it took 2.5 years to get to financial close because of political issues in Florida. But they went from a time when the marketplace was very frothy and vibrant, and actually did their financial close 2 years later in difficult market circumstances. They're one of our two teams. The other team is a financial buyer, Macquarie Infrastructure Group, or Macquarie Bank out of Australia. They're a worldwide company. They have a lot of assets, total assets around the country, and they use international accounting standards and mark-to-market. Because of traffic declines on some of the mature toll roads, their market value has declined in their assets by about 50%. But they still have roughly $50 billion of assets under management and access to a tremendous amount of liquidity to do a deal like this.
Okay. Can I go through two more?
Two more.
Okay. Another point you made, it says there is substantial doubt about the timing and the funding availability for the Inver-Gamble connection across Ship Creek, proposed to be funded by surplus bridge toll revenues, which is a critical component of the bridge needed to reduce the amount of bridge traffic through downtown. The Knickarn Crossing project should not begin until funding is demonstrated for the Inver-Gamble extension that does not come out of the LRTP. So that's...
we have financially modeled Inver-Gamble, and just for some point of reference, over 55 years the project throws off net of debt service and returns to equity about $6 billion, and that could be re-geared at some point in the future once the covenants are met on the initial debt tranche to build Inver-Gamble and potentially other transportation projects in the region. Actually, present value is to about $1 billion above and beyond the initial infrastructure build.
Okay. We also made the point in June, it says Cabada has recently proposed financing the bridge through state-backed revenue bonds, which would place a financial burden on the state and potentially put the bridge project in competition with other state-funded projects. Would this be true today?
Whether or not the state determines to back the project in some way to provide some credit enhancement, I think really goes to a question of the cost of capital. If the state chooses to do that, I guess Cabada or this body probably don't really have a lot of authority to tell them otherwise. I would suggest that it would not compete with other projects in the AMATS LRTP, which is the actual condition of Chapter 12. It's not that there would be no future public funding or that it wouldn't seek some kind of credit enhancement. What it actually says in the original Chapter 12, as approved, is that the Knickarn Crossing will not compete with or take away funding, or will not take away funding from any of the projects in the LRTP. Just to be very clear on the language.
Okay, but you have part of your financing component could be state-backed revenue bonds. Is that correct?
It could be. We are currently pursuing a public-private partnership, and what happens in that type of scenario typically is the private sector partner will do most of or all elements of finance, design, build, operate, and maintain. So the financing would actually be the borrower, if you will, of the debt, both TIFIA and any bonds or bank credit would be the private sector partner.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Ms. Yoshimura.
Obviously, your toll receipts are based upon certain projections of population growth, and I was wondering if you would be willing to share those with us in 5-year increments for the...
We can do that. These were based on ICER work that was done in about 2003. And I will tell you that ICER in total for the region has been right on the money. So far, decade to date, where they have failed is the mix between Anchorage and the Mat-Su. The The Mat-Su has grown much faster than they projected, and Anchorage has grown at a slower rate. But on a gross basis, for the combined MSA, they're just about right on the money. But we'd be happy to share that information with you.
Thank you.
Projects roughly 170,000 additional people in the region between now and approximately 2030.
Okay. Mr. Frederick.
Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Hemingway. Cabada has been willing to commit future toll revenues from the bridge to address the traffic impacts of increasing bridge traffic on Anchorage and to alleviate the impact on the AC couplet by building a connection to the Ingrid Gamble.
That's correct. There is a commitment in the LRTP and in the environmental impact statement that Cabada would be responsible. I believe there's also an agreement with the state DOT that Cabada would be responsible for constructing the Ingrid Gamble or preferably an H2H connector, depending on what happens with that project and its timing.
Okay. Well, my question is are there going to be requests or demands, depending on how you put it, from the other side of the bridge for Cabada to contribute to impacts beyond your 7 miles of...
The first pledge of those toll revenues would be to develop up to 4 lanes from the Burma, Cannick-Goose Bay, Point McKenzie Road intersection, and then to bring that all the way through into Anchorage and including the future Ingrid Gamble or H2H connector.
Okay, but
beyond that, what happens with excess toll revenues that are available for other transportation projects, and this is probably a roughly 20 years out kind of time frame, the mechanisms for how that would be allocated or prioritized have not been established today.
Well, I guess more directly, have there been any requests from Wasilla, for example, to contribute to the impact on their infrastructure that the bridge is going to contribute to?
Well, right now, the only agreement that is in place is a tri-party agreement between Cabada, the DOT, and the Mat-Su Borough to bring the Point McKenzie Road up to 4 lanes as traffic grows. There's no other commitments on the other side that are memorialized today. What happens over time with the excess toll revenue as you know, the project matures and those initial obligations are met is really going to be, you know, probably up to the DOT, AMATS. I imagine by then we'll have an MPO in the Mat-Su because they're well over 50,000 right now. They're likely to be about 100,000 in the next census. So they're probably going to have to do an MPO as well.
So that tri-party agreement that you were talking about, the cost of that is included in the...
The cost of that is included in the projections for Phase 2.
And when you respond to Ms. P's request for an outline of projections, will that be noted in there?
We could do that, yes.
It'd be interesting to see that breakdown. Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Pease, you are the last in the queue.
Thank you. With regard to the timing for the Ingrid Gamble, and Mr. Wilbur might need to weigh on this too, my understanding is that it will be in Phase 2, and that Phase 2 is triggered because the bridge, 2-lane bridge, is at capacity. But what about some threshold that's based on the impacts to Anchorage? And that might happen along the AC couplet long before the bridge is maxed out. And this was raised by one of the public commenters.
Well, the commitments that are in the LRTP or that we've made, I think, with the city as well, is that the Ingrid Gamble connector would be built as early as 2018 based on traffic volumes. We also have a commitment for an approximately $2 million study of traffic for the effects of the bridge, starting to measure like a year before it opens and then a year after, so that we can start to take a look at what the rest of the impacts are in the network. One of the things that I think everybody's got to realize is the population's growing whether we build this bridge or not. There are impacts that are going to have to be addressed whether we build this bridge or not for the transportation network. And the bridge will not be able to fund all of the needs. It will be able to fund, likely in the future, some of the needs beyond the responsibility as defined in the statute of Cabada, but it will not be able to fund all the state's transportation needs. It's extremely important, though, that we look ahead, because right now the Transportation Trust Fund has been bailed out for the second time in 2 years. Last year for about $8 billion, this year for about $7 billion. It's on the trajectory to be broke again in another 10 months. Alaska's relied very heavily on federal funding for its transportation network, what limited network we have. Those days of being a net recipient state where we get $5 for every dollar of gas tax paid at the federal level are probably starting to slip away. And the state needs to find other funding paradigms for projects like the Kinnickinnic Crossing. This is really a visionary project. It's a new project for the state. The only other toll facility in the state is the Whittier Tunnel, and it's really not comparable. It's a tunnel to Whittier. This is a tunnel, or this is a bridge that is connecting 53% of the population, the major transportation and port facility in the state through the airports, and the regional impacts of this project are huge. We are very fortunate that we can fund about 90% of its construction costs and all of its operations and maintenance and future expansion with toll revenues in the form of user fees, because a project like this just simply couldn't be built if we were relying on pay-as-you-go federal funding.
Okay, Mr. Weddleton.
You say something actually very interesting that opens a door. Is that you say Mat-Su could likely become an MPO after
it is. There's some regulations, federal. They're around population and density. They're triggered on the, was it decennial, whatever the right word is, the 10-year census. The next census obviously is coming up in 2010. That should be completed in 2011. It's probable that they're going to be about at the threshold of population and density in the kind of the Palmer-Wasilla, Houston, Kinnick-Goose Bay corridor, that they may be required to form an MPO, or they may voluntarily form an MPO simply because they're growing so fast under the federal regs.
So if they were an MPO, they would do a long-range transportation plan, and there appears to be lots of support. They could put this bridge on their plan.
That's correct, but we are planning to move ahead with the environmental process that we're in, because if it is not completed in the fairly near future, a lot of those studies are going to have to be redone, and that's at great expense. It's not building any infrastructure or transportation assets for Alaskans, and that's just an irresponsible use of public funds.
Thanks.
Well,
in my opinion, of course.
At some point, I think that as a region, and Mr. Wilbur is more knowledgeable about this than I am, it makes sense when we reach the required threshold population-wise between the two areas to explore creating a regional MPO like they have in some other areas in the lower 48, where large geographic areas have one MPO to look at the transportation needs of a bigger area, and everybody sits down at the same table.
I concur.
You concur.
I will point out to this body that today about 44% of the Mat-Su borough workforce commutes outside of the borough for work. Almost 100% of that to or through Anchorage, and about 36% of that workforce actually is employed in Anchorage. Okay. So we have a tremendous amount of traffic pressure that's occurring on the Glen Highway. If this project isn't built, the state will have to expend about $300 million to upgrade the Glen Highway north of Eagle River to the Glen Parks interchange, and we'll have to spend about $250 million additional to build a Wasilla bypass. So this project will save transportation money in the future for the state.
Okay. Ms. Pease and Ms. Yoshimura, and then we're going to take a break. And I'm sorry to the two people that are here left to testify, but it's time. Ms. Pease?
Yeah, I just forgot to mention that there are several references to the independent cost estimate completed in January 2009 that stated that without an equitable risk-sharing agreement, the project will not be economically feasible if all risks were to be passed on to the contractor. And I'd like to see, when you give us your reply, why you feel that
We can do something with that respect. I want to point out to this body that with any contract with a public-private partnership, the best value proposition is allocating the risk to the party best able to bear it. And an example would be right-of-way procurement. The public entity has eminent domain, the private sector doesn't. That would be an inappropriate risk to transfer to the private sector. Some historic preservation and that type of thing, where they may find, something like the little museum up there at Connect, where they are digging and they find remains or something. Those kinds of risks are typically borne only to a limit by the private sector. They will take all of the design-build risk, all of the operations and maintenance risk, and the risk of financing and refinancing. But there are certain things that you simply can't push off to them without making the project prohibitively expensive.
Okay. Ms. Yoshimura.
Just one very quick question. The Department of Neighborhoods in Anchorage says that 32% of all Valley residents work in Anchorage, and you quoted 42%, and I was wondering where that number came from.
This is actually a couple-year-old trends statistic. That's the Department of Labor and Workforce Development.
Okay.
I believe it's a 05 or 06 statistic. I do suspect that the amount, because of the population growth that's happening up there, as that population grows, a certain amount of jobs start to migrate into the area. I would not be surprised to see that the percentage of commuters has declined, even though the absolute number has increased in the meantime.
Isn't that a bad thing for your toll?
32% of 100,000 is a lot more than 36% of 50,000. So we're pretty confident in the total numbers because anybody who's lived here and seen what's happened in the valley over the last 10 years, it's just shocking, the rate of growth. I don't get up there frequently, but every couple of years drive through, and I'm just continuously amazed at the volume of traffic and the amount of development that's occurring.
Okay. Anyone else have a question for Mr. Hemingway? Thank you for coming forward and for being patient with our questions.
Thank you. I apologize for not getting up here first since we all started with finance. So, Thank you.
And I apologize to the last couple of speakers, but we need to take a short break, and I mean less than 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. So run, don't walk. Before Ms. Holmes begins her testimony, I just want to announce for the record that I received a couple of documents that are from Mary Ann Pease. She had to leave and could not stay. And one is, the first document is her written testimony she was planning to present this evening. And the second is a handout. It's a document, and it's some columnar data. I really haven't looked at it yet. It's starting with Mr. Weddleton, and will come down everyone's way, and I will look at it when it gets to me. But I just wanted to announce that, and it will be entered into the record of the proceedings. And I would request of staff that, Ms. Underwood, these two documents that are being passed around and will end up with Ms. Graves, for the record, I would request if copies could be emailed to commissioners so we can just have those for our files. Yes, Ms. Holmes.
Diane Holmes, and I just want to say, even though I can't show it to you, that your work in June, your resolution, was one of your finer moments, and I'm asking that you recycle it again, and I'm sorry that this is about the third time you have had to have this come before you, and I am too. And I'm asking you again to delete the bridge from the long-range transportation plan because of the reasons you've already given, and the need to adhere to 2020's higher priority goals, which is your main objective in P&Z is adhering to 2020. Right?
Right.
However, you may wish to add a few comments that I have are concerns of mine. One is that you should be aware that ICER has revised their projections for the Mat-Su growth downward, and you should be aware of that and probably get them, especially Mr. Weddleton would like to know that. Perhaps one of your points, point 24, you would like to expound upon the economic realization that property taxes don't pay for all of our services, rather that commercial and industrial does. And so if these things move to the other side of the inlet, we will be then less able to pay for our services, and Anchorage will decline as the economic capital, and our property values will decrease. There is a very good likelihood that also that you should be aware of that 2 federal agencies may require the 8,000-foot bridge to become a 14,000-foot bridge to deal with salmon and whale issues. And, of course, that would make the bridge about over $1 billion. You know, I'm just continually amazed that some, mainly the Assembly of a few years ago, just don't grasp the significance of how land use development and transportation are intertwined in order to reach our goals of our comprehensive plan. Certainly you do. Another point, I'm also amazed that somehow only from buttress to buttress on this bridge is being considered for funding. I'm concerned about Government Hill and downtown. And we just passed an incredible comprehensive plan for downtown, and it will be absolutely worthless if this goes through with all the traffic on AC. Mr. French already told you that another amazing fact that Cabata is hoping for, hanging their hat on success on that the bridge within a few years will generate the traffic in 2 lanes that are almost equal to Glen Highway's 6 lanes today. And I just wish that as much effort was put into your point 25 about commuter rail and mass transit and good affordable housing development than this bridge, and we would really have a great city that was economic developed without the cost of sprawl. And every time we develop any place, you know, sprawl costs money. With limited funds, somebody comes up short. Thanks.
Are there questions for Ms. Holmes?
You're going to hear from someone a lot better than I am figures, so I'm saving her. We saved her for the last.
All right. Thank you very much for coming out and waiting this evening. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and other Commission members for the opportunity to speak tonight. As I think many of you know, my name is Lois Epstein. I am an engineer, and I'm also director of the Alaska Transportation Priorities Project, or ATPP. ATPP represents conservation organizations, businesses, and individuals interested in promoting sensible transportation systems and policies in the state. I also serve on the AMATS Technical Advisory Committee as the representative for the AMATS Citizen Air Quality Advisory Committee. As a member of the Technical Advisory Committee, I supported the committee's recommendation to move the Kinnicon Bridge to a long-term project in the Anchorage LRTP, and I will reiterate that support tonight. The timing is not right for the bridge. There is not a solidified financial plan. Cabata's traffic estimates have not been independently verified and are highly questionable. The National Marine Fisheries Service and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers have not approved the current bridge design. And the Glen Seward Highway to Highway project has not advanced sufficiently, and it is connected to this project. And the newly formed Regional Transit Authority, which will improve transportation along the Glen Highway corridor, has just begun its work. Note that the last 2 projects likely will reduce the potential number of bridge users and correspondingly will reduce toll revenue. Additionally, at this point, federal, private, and state money to fund the bridge is unlikely or highly uncertain. I'd be happy to provide documentation on that. The most recent cost estimate issued in May 2009 for the bridge and its access roads by the Federal Highway Administration shows the cost for phases 1 and 2, both phases together, over $1.5 billion. That's a 90% probability. from the Federal Highway Administration. The cost estimate does not include any additional funds likely needed to address protection of the endangered Cook Inlet beluga whale. Cabata has not yet demonstrated how it can pay for even the $700 million Phase 1 portion of the bridge without a viable public partner. We've heard that there are viable public partners. We haven't seen a demonstration of that other than their expressed interest several years ago prior to the financial meltdown. And as I think all of you know, Phase 2 is critical to be put in place ASAP if the bridge is constructed so downtown can become the vibrant, pedestrian-friendly community we all would like to see rather than a corridor for truck traffic. The recent financial analysis performed by Mr. Kenworthy using Cabata's own numbers, and if anything, is optimistic in terms of traffic. It was performed by the Federal Highway Administration in 2008 when Senator Stevens was still pushing for the bridge. It does show that the total revenues will be insufficient to fund the bridge. State revenue guarantees thus are essential for the bridge to proceed, and acknowledgement by Mr. Hemingway of that today. And that finding was also confirmed by the independent contractor hired by the state to estimate the bridge's cost. The TIFIA financial analysis referred to by Mr. Hemingway assumes a substantial equity investment of tens of millions of dollars by private investors, and we would deem that unlikely at this point, absent any additional evidence that that's likely to happen. And as a quick calculation by my colleague, by Mr. Kenworthy, interest-only cost on a $650 million bridge over 37.5 years would result in $28 million a year in costs, a very substantial number. And if we're talking about a principal, a loan payment with 0% interest rate, the number is going to be over $17 million a year. So in either scenario, without a private partner investing substantial amounts, it's going to be quite expensive. If the state and Anchorage must make up a funding shortfall for the bridge using federal transportation local money, the project's high cost will make it impossible to fund many projects needed to implement Anchorage 2020. And my last subsequent point, finally, the bridge inevitably will increase the region's swell and thus run counter to Anchorage 2020's neighborhood development and infill redevelopment objectives. Notably, as Commissioner Yoshimura mentioned, about one-third of all Matsu Borough workers are employed in the borough, about one-third of the Matsu Borough workers are commuting to Anchorage, and two-thirds are employed in the borough, so the bridge also is not essential for borough-wide economic development. As a member of the Technical Advisory Committee, I look forward to analyzing any new Cabata numbers, and we heard there may be some that have been developed as recently as last week, so I'd like to see that in future meetings. And thank you very much for considering these comments. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Are there questions of Ms. Epstein? Yes, Ms. Pease?
Yes, Ms. Epstein, I didn't catch your reference to Cabata's own analysis showed, I think, something to do with the infeasibility of private financing, but I didn't catch the rest of that. Could you repeat that point?
Are you talking about the acknowledgement that they would need some sort of credit enhancement that we all heard tonight?
I did hear that. Was there something else that you were raising? It was right after you talked about the need to have Phase 2 Gamber-Ingle ASAP, and right before you talked about the TIFIA analysis, and I was trying to take notes.
I just was commenting that Mr. Kenworthy's analysis used Cabata's own numbers, as well as the numbers generated by the Federal Highway Administration for traffic.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Ms. Epstein? Yes, Ms. Pease?
Yes, I had one more. You mentioned that Cabata's traffic projections have not been independently verified. Would typically the state agency, the municipality, who would typically try to verify these traffic projections?
Yeah, it would be great if the municipality used its traffic model to look at what Cabata has done. Their contractors have modeled growth and destinations, and we would like to see some of the municipalities' consultants possibly even the state's consultants look at that, because there has been an independent verification of the cost of the bridge, and so I think there's widespread agreement in the $700 million number for Phase 1, but there isn't the same level of confidence in the revenue side.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anyone else have questions for Ms. Epstein? I do. I have one, and well, it's a request. The documents that I mentioned earlier this evening when I was making my disclosures, that apparently you sent to me after you got back from your trip.
Actually, right before my trip. It was a week ago Thursday that I sent it to you.
I don't recall receiving those, Ms. Epstein, and so if I did, I may have inadvertently deleted them, or they may have gotten caught in our email system filter or whatever. Could you send those to Mr. Wilbur?
Sure.
So that he can not only distribute them to all planning commissioners, but I would like those to be, send them to Ms. Underwood. And then, Ms. Underwood, if you could distribute them to all planning commissioners. And I would also like them posted on the AMAT's website so the public can access those. The same with Ms. P's comments that you're going to receive. Anything we received that was handed to us at the hearing tonight needs to be added to the website so the public can have access to it. Thank you. And thank you for coming out this evening.
And thank you for hanging in there till this late hour on this.
Well, this is an early hour. Thank you. A late hour is midnight. Is there anyone else that would like to testify? We do not want to disenfranchise anyone. Anyone at all that hasn't spoken yet? No one? Well, seeing no one to jump up, Ms. Pease?
Yes, I did want to follow up on the traffic projections.
Can I close the hearing first? Okay. If there's no one else that wishes to testify, I'll close the hearing. And now we could proceed with questions of staff.
Yes. One of the most intriguing disagreements in numbers has been the traffic projections, particularly the current one-way trips on the Glen Highway compared to what's supposed to cross the bridge in year 2 or year 3. And I think if staff has models that they could bring to bear on those numbers, they do seem amazing. So I'd like to see what independent projections or independent analysis would reveal on those.
Okay. Any further questions, staff? Ms. Yoshimura?
I'm wondering what resources the Planning and Zoning Commission might have in order to analyze some of the financial information that we have received. I am wondering if who might be available. I know it's not a planning function, but we've heard varying scenarios in terms of this financial viability, and we have lots of facts and figures and numbers here, and I'm wondering if there's someone within the municipality that the Planning and Zoning Commission could rely upon to do some sort of analysis.
Perhaps our staff has an answer to that question for us.
Yes, I think there is. I just don't know who within the municipality. I don't want to burden the folks at Finance or the Controller's Office, given the budget process they're working through right now. But if I could just have maybe a couple days, I can confer with Greg Jones and some folks in the City Hall, and they may be able to give us some guidance if the Commission is looking for somebody within the municipality to give a little bit more scrutiny to the information you've received this evening from a financial. And I would just add to that, when we did the financial plan for the long-range transportation plan, I did talk to the CFO at the time. I talked to the treasurer. I've talked to anybody that I could to find out what's reasonable assumptions for predicting the future of cost of projects, revenue streams, and it is a difficult task to do. So whatever guidance we can receive, we will certainly pass that on.
Okay. Any further questions of staff? Apparently not. We need a motion to figure out what direction we're going to go. Mr. Weddleton. That's seconded by Mr. Isham. Would you care to state your motion?
I'd move to reiterate our resolution of June 15th with a few modifications.
Okay, go ahead.
One is on the 1, 2, 3, 4. We had this handed out to us, our previous resolution. On the 6th whereas, where it refers to the Planning and Zoning Commission acting as a Mass Citizen Advisory Committee, it says held public hearings on May 18th and June 1st, 2009, and also November 9th, 2009. After the now therefore be it resolved on number 2, I would delete the substantial and just say there is risk that the project. On page 2, I would delete the first 2 bullets. On page 3, on point 11, I would delete everything after values. We'll just put a period there. Also on page 3, I would delete number 15. On page 4, delete 19. On page 5, delete 28. On page 6, part C, I would modify that to be relevant to the case in front of us today. And I think there's some phrasing in there that does not currently apply. So I'd rely on staff to help with wording on that. And actually in wording that is looking at the memo from staff for this item on the second page under decision desired, is take wording from that to make part C relevant. And then change the date on passed and approved, of course.
Okay. Would you care to speak to your motion?
Yes. Some of the items I removed refer to the financial aspects of the project, which are important, but I don't think key to our main role. As a member of the Planning and Zoning, I think the main policies that we look at, or main way we should look at these things is, does this fit in with adopted plans or doesn't it? The discussion in the comments that we got barely touches on that. It touches on the fiscal constraints of the long-range transportation plan, both that it is good or it isn't good. And I don't find these particularly relevant to our current decision. There's also quite a bit of critique of the public participation process, which I believe for this, since we're on round 2 of this year, has actually been quite extensive. When I look kind of a bottom line on Anchors 2020, the overriding emphasis is we build up, not out. And we look at plans we passed recently, the bike plan and the Hillside District plan, just that we're actually still working on. We've made accommodations of greater density. We've taken, basically developed those plans to meet the goals of Anchors 2020. And this bridge is clearly not a build-up plan. It's a build-out. It's diametrically opposed to the goals of Anchorage 2020. And I think that's the fundamental decision point for us to make tonight.
Does that conclude your comments? Yes. Okay. Ms. Pease.
I agree with Commissioner Weddleton's comments that we need to emphasize the land use impacts. But I don't see a need to delete any of the financial concerns in the points that he recommended deleting. We have a little bit different role in our role as Citizen Advisory Committee to the LRTP. We have to look at whether this proposed plan meets the LRTP requirements. And one of the LRTP requirements is that this project is supposed to pay for itself through private financing and toll revenues and not put any competition or burden on public sources of funding that are sorely needed for other transportation projects or perhaps other infrastructure. And I am not comfortable with eliminating our statements of doubt about the timing and funding availability for the Inger-Gamble connection or the general ability of this project to pay for itself through private funding. Other citizen groups, including we heard tonight, the State Chamber of Commerce, they conditioned their support on the concept that this project would pay for itself. So although we usually look at land use or transportation efficiency, I think we really are compelled to look at the financial constraints or the potential financial burdens of this project and how they affect our LRTP spending and our comprehensive plan priorities.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, you may.
The sections I deleted eliminate a few pieces that may not be factually correct, and I erred on the side of, if in doubt, I would take them out. But I think there are still statements in here that reflect the point you've made, where there's some tenuous connection with the traffic forecast and so on, and that and comments that it should pay for itself and not use other public funds. So my intent was not to take those out. But I think in talking with Mr. Hemingway, the point of Cabada currently has not sought private funding. Well, he says they'll use toll revenue. Well, will that work or not? That only find out in the future should it be built. So we can't really debate. That's not necessarily a true point, so I think it's worth pulling out. They provided no evidence of recent progress to enter a funding contract. Well, he gave some discussion. They're working on it. So I think it's not true to say there's no progress. They've had some.
Okay. I've got some other folks here in the queue. Mr. Isham.
Even though I seconded this, I don't think I'm going to support it because I think we're going to make a decision before we get some other information that we've asked these people to provide us. So I think we're being a little hasty, quite honestly. Now, I don't know what kind of impact that has on what has to go in front of the Assembly, but I would really like to see some of this stuff that we asked Mr. Hemingway to provide before I sign off on something like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, then I think you could offer a substitute motion, and we could vote whether or not to substitute. Or you could ask Mr. Weddleton if he would agree to withdraw his motion and consider a postponement. We can make it easy or painful.
Well, I'd consider a postponement. Is there some way to kind of retain the gist of this than simply postpone it?
No. If we set this aside, we're going to have this, if you agree to a postponement, this motion is gone.
But you can come back.
But you can make it again.
Okay, I will agree with that. However, when we looked at this back in June, we asked for the same kind of information. I don't remember getting it, maybe because I think we asked in May, and then we made our resolution in June.
But I think perhaps we were a little more articulate tonight.
Okay, well, I'd agree. I'll withdraw the motion.
I'm the eternal optimist, and I would like to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. So, you will make a motion to postpone? Just a minute, set it up. And Mr. Isham, second that. Postpone to when, Mr. Weddleton?
I move to postpone till a date that Mr. Wilbur recommends.
Just a minute, our secretary's catching up with us. Our bad. Motion, okay, motion to withdraw. Was there any objection to the withdrawing of the motion? I didn't think so. Okay. That was, the mover was Mr. Weddleton, the seconder was Mr. Isham. Okay.
So I move to postpone until a date.
That that we're advised by Mr. Wilbur.
Through the chair, if I could just make sure that the questions the commission asked were three. One was from Mr. Hemingway for some simple data over the next 20 years. I think Commissioner Pease asked that question. The second one was the traffic projections from our model. That was the next one I had. And the third I have is review of the financial analysis information that we received from someone inside the municipality.
Correct. Ms. Yoshimura asked that question.
I think we can accomplish all three of those things with a response. And I think the most difficult one is going to be the financial analysis. And I would like to believe and do believe that Cabada will be very receptive and responsive to the data that they've requested. So the next meeting is 1st of December, I believe. Is it the 7th? We would want to do it then.
Okay. The 7th of December.
Busy day.
And will you be sure to post everything that, as it comes in on the website so interested people can, keep checking it and be kept up to date?
Yes, Madam Chair, but let me just clarify a formality. As we get information from, let's say, Knik Arm Bridge and Toll Authority on their issues, you want us to provide that to you and post it? When we get the information on the modeling, we'll provide it and post it?
Yes. I want the public to have access to it as soon as we get it.
We will do that.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton, did you have something more to say?
Well, I do. Since we postponed it, this meeting that's scheduled for November 17th, that's a difficult day because a lot of us will be at that planning meeting. And so I wonder if that was worth going to. It could be postponed, and can we call it a work session so it's on the record?
Well, they're going to have a work session, and I don't know what they do with their work sessions. If they do them on the record or whatever. I could ask her, when AMATS has a work session, do you attend and record it?
No. I don't think there's been a work session yet since I started.
Right. Maybe if I could clarify the purpose of the meeting on the 17th. When I did meet with Knik Arm Bridge and Toll Authority about the concerns, they expressed a concern that the AMATS committees have not had an opportunity to get a project status of their efforts. So we set this up as a project manager would come before AMATS and tell us about the status of their project, their schedule, and so that is the purpose of it, so that they can provide more current information. It's unfortunate, the meeting on the 17th was originally scheduled for the 10th. We tried to get it earlier this week, but there were some key members of the policy committee that were not able to attend. That is why it's on the 17th.
Well, I think whatever information they provide at that work session can be provided to us.
Absolutely, Madam Chair.
And we just can't go. We have the motion on the floor. Yes.
Whoops, I pushed the button to speak. On the follow-up, I had also heard requests from, I can't remember if it was me or another commissioner, on the changes in projected Mat-Su growth to make sure that we know what changes ICER has projected there since the original data. And then also I believe we asked for some kind of verification of the potential impacts of state or municipal financial responsibility in relation to the AMATS budget, because we heard some numbers about the magnitude that it could eat up the whole AMATS budget in the early years. So I'd hope to hear, since that was from a opposition party, hear whether those numbers tracked with AMATS figures.
Through the chair, I would concur. The information on the match through growth projections, it's information most recently created as for the purpose of the Highway to Highway project, so that's the information we'll share. And then this issue about the impacts on the budget, we have done some, I think one of the policy committee members actually asked that question, and we're working on a response for them. We'll provide that as well.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we have a motion to postpone on the floor. Is there any objection? Hearing none, this will be on our agenda for December 7th under unfinished business. There'll be no more testimony taken that night. It will just be under unfinished business, and we, at that time, will receive and discuss the new information we've received and probably have a motion and deliberate. Okay, going back to our agenda. Now we have our Planning Commission Commissioner hats back on. There's nothing further on our agenda this evening. Does staff have any reports? No reports from the secretary? Okay, a motion to adjourn would be in order. And Ms. Pease and Mr. Isham made that motion. Any objection? Hearing none, we are adjourned. And everyone have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I'm going to.